Hello, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to camp. This is a very exciting episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, dropping F Miles in the chat. Miles is my friend from college that the audience does not like, and that makes me very happy for some reason. So again, campfires in the chat. Drop some tents in the chat. I'm dropping F Miles just for old time's sake. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you guys tuning into the episodes this week with Shaman Omar, which was awesome, and my good friend Anthony DeVito on Monday talking about mobsters. Today is a very, very exciting guest for me. These are one of the days of the podcast that I get very excited about because it's a very specific niche interest that affects me on a very personal level that I get to explore and unpack, and it's a very, very interesting substrata of anthropology and parenting that I think make complete sense, and I'm so excited to have this woman in front of me today. It's Meredith Small, Dr. Meredith Small. I can't leave that out. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
This is so exciting. I read your book when my wife was about 4 months pregnant. This is how long ago? This is maybe 8 months ago or something. My baby is like two months old now, and he's amazing. And I don't exactly remember how I found your book. I've always been interested in anthropology and sort of understanding human beings on a fundamental level, right? Like, what is it that truly makes human beings what we are? And going all the way back to the very beginning of the Anthropocene, what have we been doing for the most amount of time? And applying those things to my life as much as possible. And I think there's a lot of things happening within like sort of the productivity movement that people have been doing. Like Dr. Huberman talks about getting sunlight in your eyes in the morning because it helps sort of regulate your hormonal and circadian rhythms. Like in terms of dietary things, I'm trying to pull out processed foods because, again, these things are all so new in the scope of humanity. And then when I was having a baby, I was asking myself the same question. How did people raise kids for, 100,000, 200,000, depending on when you believe that, Homo sapiens began in terms of the present consciousness we have? How do people raise babies? How have they been doing it in hunter-gatherer societies, pre-agrarian times? What did we do? And it sort of just like rocked my world. I was like, this is crazy. And I found your book. I read the whole thing. I immediately emailed you and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And I've applied the rules and the things in the book. I shouldn't say rules, actually. I've applied some of your findings in the book to our parenting strategy, and it has been remarkable. Our baby is, and maybe it's coincidence, I can't say it's causal, but my suspicion is that it is. But it's just been remarkable. So thank you so much for writing this book. It's great.
I want to add when you were thinking about what was it like in the past when Homo sapiens were as we are today, it's about 200,000 years ago. But also added to that is Western culture is 1.2 billion people, and there are 8 billion people on the planet. So what do the other 6.8 billion people who are not in Western industrialized culture, how do they bring up their babies? And are there hints and clues, and what are their babies like? People only know about that if they travel.
Yeah.
And they land in, Asia or Africa or, some distant culture, and see children running around in a certain way and babies being on mothers' backs all the time. And I remember my ex-brother-in-law who was in Zimbabwe for a year as a student, and he came home and he said, "Hey, Meredith, do you know that they carry their babies all the time?" And I said, "Yeah, Ben, I do." And he goes, No, I mean all the time. So it's even looking in different directions, not just the past, that is useful, because the way we parent in Western culture, and the United States in particular, is wacky. It's really wacky, and I think it's the most difficult place on earth to be a parent, is the United States.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong. I mean, talk to parents in America and, pockets of Western Europe, the Western world, sort of, generally speaking, and they're stressed.
Absolutely.
And they're tired, and it's very, very difficult.
There are no social networks. There is no help. You're supposed to, as in anthropology, we call them the belief system that we run by, which is independence and self-reliance. So, put that baby on a schedule, get them to grow up and become a CEO of a company. And it's all about isolation, really. And Humans aren't designed like that, little or big.
Yeah.
Nobody is designed to be by themselves all the time.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to sort of preface with the audience your role with writing this book. You are an anthropologist.
I am an anthropologist,
and you taught at Cornell for,
Yep.
I think you said 35 years.
At least, yes.
Wow. And what's also amazing, and we'll have a different podcast about this, you're also an expert in Venetian history.
Yes, I did make that odd turn in the last
Which
couple
is
of years,
great.
but I'll say I'm back. I'm writing a book right now. Pegasus is my publisher, and it won't be out for probably a year and a half. But I'm back to being more anthropological, and I'm writing about a book about the anthropology of family. And let me tell you, it's really hard.
I can imagine. I can imagine. But again, the book was just excellent. So throughout this conversation, I just want to unpack some things when it comes to parenthood that, again, some people told this to me when I was having our baby. They go, it doesn't come with a manual, right? Which is sort of like this aphorism you hear, this little idiom. You're like, all right, yeah, whatever. And it is so true. And it comes down to every little thing that you do with this tiny human. There's no rule book for. It's like, okay, breastfeeding or not breastfeeding, where does the baby sleep? In a crib, in the room, in a different room? When do we pick them up? When they're crying a lot or when they cry a little? Or like, how do they go to sleep? How long should they sleep? Like every question, a stroller, not a stroller, like there are so many things you take for granted that may or may not be the best thing for our kids. And furthermore, things that we don't even consider that are actually really beneficial. Everything is brand new when you have a baby, and I'm going through that now. And your book just offered so much comfort.
Let me ask you a question.
Please.
You and your wife, do you have siblings? Did you have younger siblings? Did you ever have to take care of your siblings?
Yes, I had one younger sibling and then 5 older siblings.
So they probably took care of you.
Yeah, I was probably getting taken care of.
Did either of you ever babysit?
Yes.
But
yes.
I think that's one of the problems is because, and I always come to this, the decrease in the birth rate in Western culture, that most people, by the time they're going to have a baby, they have had no experience with a baby because they were in, a family with 1 child, 2 children, and when I was younger, people had 4 kids, 8 kids, 6 kids. Yep. And so there was more exposure to infants. And when my daughter was little, I took her over to the neighbors who had babies because there wasn't going to be another child. And I wanted her to be exposed to kids. And her father, when he was young, his mother was going to have another baby, and she sent him to the Red Cross babysitting class. Twice.
Oh, wow.
So he knew how to do everything because of that.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I think we're missing that intergenerational experience with babies. And so people are left with exactly those questions. What do I do with this thing? I'm in charge.
Yeah.
And it's going to die if I don't do something?
It's crazy.
What is it?
I mean, my friend Miles that we talked about, that the audience hates, shout out to you guys. He came over, like, I don't know, a week after our baby was born, and I put him in his hands, and he was just so awkward. He was like, what do I and I was like, have you held a baby before? He goes, no. Why would I meet a baby? I was like, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, the 2 things that we are not used to in Western culture are babies and death.
I was just about to say that. It's very interesting that our society has compartmentalized these things that I think socially we see as inconvenient. That I think young children are seen as sort of a nuisance. We don't really want to be around them. It's like a whole headache. Don't deal with it. They're expensive. And then death is the ultimate inconvenience. Your parents get old, your grandparents, they become a burden on you. And it also is a reminder of our own mortality. Let's just put them in a home and we don't look at it. Yeah. And I think that it robs us of a fuller human experience by, being removed from the bookends of life.
I think it also makes us a more lonely culture.
Absolutely. I mean, what a shame, right? Like all these, young children, like looking for, mentorship and looking for connection that may or may not have it. And then all these old grandparents in homes by themselves. Yeah. And it's like, if only we could all come and live together in some type of community.
And the assumption that every culture has this assumption that what they are doing is the right way.
Sure.
And that it is the normal way. And the only way you get out of that is to take a class in anthropology or to travel.
Right.
And not to travel to Europe because that's Western culture,
Right.
but to some other place where you're confronted with different life ways. And basically, that was my job for 30 years.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, I wanted to put all these 18-year-olds on a 747 and take them somewhere. But I would say to them, not everybody in the world has a cell phone, and 1 out of every 5 people on the planet is Chinese. And if we don't know what the Chinese think and feel, we know nothing. And of course, there are a zillion different kinds of Chinese people. It's not like there's one type.
Right.
So I think Americans especially are not well experienced or educated in other cultures. And we learn mostly, I think, from others who immigrate into the United States. Or if we have an ancestry, that came over here from some other time.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think sometimes in America, there's a little sense of maybe a cultural centrism, maybe like an ethnocentrism, where
Always.
it's oh, what can I really learn from someone in Malawi? What can I really learn from someone in West Africa living in a small village? What can they teach me? And again, coming from this perspective where it's I'm trying to see how parenting is done from every different culture. What is the human experience outside of America to parenting? You look at that and you go, oh, wow, they have a lot of things figured out that they've been doing for a very, very long time that I think we can learn a lot from. And that's what I'm hoping to discuss today.
Yeah. The anthropologist Robert Levine and his wife, who worked with the Gusii people in East Africa, once showed the Gusii mothers and grandmothers film of Americans changing their baby. And these people said, what is wrong with them? They don't even know how to diaper a baby because the baby's screaming and, everything.
Wow.
So
well, it makes sense.
The judging
also
goes both ways.
Sure. It makes sense also, right? America, we are a relatively new country of, predominantly immigrants within the last few generations that all came here that typically cut ties with our old ancestry, and we had to figure everything out from scratch. So I also have sympathy for the American experience. Yeah, I talked to my parents, my grandparents, and they're we didn't breastfeed. We didn't know what to do. We were told from some corporation, and I couldn't talk to my mom because they were off in England somewhere, and I had to write a letter and take 3 weeks to get advice. So we just figured it out. So I think that kind of explains a little bit about it. And then one last little underpinning I want to say before we dive into some of the substantive little, actual actionable items. The things that we discussed today, they can be sensitive. I think a lot of people take a lot of personal, maybe umbrage with the way people describe parenting. And that, the way that we're sort of discussing parenting today might be outside of the way that someone listening that is a parent is parenting their kids. And I think it's worth noting, whatever you're doing is probably fine. I think I just wanted to say, if I think a lot of parents feel guilty about the way they parent. They're oh, I'm not doing this enough. I do this too much. Whatever you're doing is probably fine. If you're not abusing your kid, you're probably
I totally
okay.
agree. And watching this over the last 25, 30 years, I am personally saddened by especially how difficult this is for women, because this used to be the bastion of women. If they're going to take everything else away, still we were mothers. And then the culture came and told women they didn't know how to mother. And that infuriates me.
Yeah.
So it's very contentious. When my niece was having children, she's like, this is horrible. I need to talk to you. Everybody's telling me what to do. And my response was, don't listen to anybody. Listen to yourself.
Yeah. So I guess the first place to start, something that I think you begin your book this way, is sort of discussing from an anthropological lens, why are babies so helpless?
We are very different. If you think about, let's say, a deer, and the baby deer is born and it stands up and it immediately starts suckling on its mother and it can walk. We have these neurologically unfinished babies who can't sit up, certainly can't talk, can't feed them. Well, they can sort of feed themselves, but it seems like you have to operationalize that feeding. And clearly they can't take care of themselves in any way, shape, or form. Well, it's very odd that we're like that, especially for someone like me who spent lots of years watching monkeys in the field, macaque monkeys, which is what I used to do a long time ago. And those babies are born and they can immediately cling to their mothers. And then they eventually, after a month or two, they're on the backs of their mothers and they're holding on and they're toddling away and coming back. So we have these extremely, almost like kangaroos, babies who are inside for so long, extremely dependent infants. And so what anthropologists, the theory that everyone has is that at first in human evolution, the first thing that made us human, if we want to label it that way, is actually bipedalism, standing up on two legs and walking. It's not a big brain. Everybody says, oh, humans have big brains. That's what makes us different. But if you look at the fossil record, it's really bipedalism. So around 4, 5, 6 million years ago, we have paleontological evidence from pelvises and foot bones that those creatures who are our ancient ancestors became bipedal. But at that point, their brains were still very small, the size of a chimpanzee. So we know from looking at the pelvis, and I'm talking if any of your listeners know the fossil Lucy. There we go. That's great. The fossil Lucy in Australopithecine, Australopithecus afarensis, about 3.5 million years ago. And we have the fossil Lucy, which is a 40% complete skeleton. So we've got her pelvis. And the parts that we don't have, they could mirror image them. So Lucy's pelvis doesn't look like a modern human pelvis, and it doesn't look like a chimpanzee pelvis. So a chimpanzee pelvis has a very reasonably small, round opening for the baby's head to go out. And the pelvic blades are very thin and upright. And so that chimp baby going out is basically going out a tunnel, and it's not a problem. Lucy's pelvis, the what are called the iliac blades or the pelvic blades, the broad bones of her pelvis, really tilt outwards, but the opening is ovoid. And still, Lucy's baby, if she had any, but Australopithecine babies, which are, the word is hominids like us, they feel that the babies turned an angle and then they went out and it was really easy. So the problem came at about 1.5 million years ago when there was a dramatic increase shown by the fossil record and the skulls in brain size. And one of the big questions in this research is, how come? And we can get to that at a point. But why do we have such big brains? My personal favorite is social intelligence, keeping track of relationships. That's not tool use, because this all happened before there was much tool use. Certainly not language. That's very recent.
What about cooking food?
Still a little bit later, there's some of that. And an anthropologist named Richard Wrangham has written a book about the possibility of food. But that's still it's later.
Interesting.
So Lucy is sort of a transition. Australopithecines are a transition between a more ape-like creature and a more of what we think of as a human creature. And the problem came about like I said, 1.5 million years ago, huge increase and sudden in geological times, meaning not overnight, but hundreds of thousands of years. And then you have a misfit between the pelvic opening and the size of the baby's head. And that's why women go through labor, is because humans became bipedal. That's the reason. And then we got big brains. And so there's a misfit. But the reality is, if you take a chimpanzee skull as a baby and plot it out to adulthood, and you take a human one, human babies should really be born with much bigger heads and bigger brains to make it to adulthood. And they don't because they can't. It's an evolutionary compromise. The pelvic area is restricting the birth of a bigger-headed baby, because if the head got any bigger, women wouldn't be able to walk. The pelvis would change so dramatically. So it's a very interesting evolutionary compromise that the baby is born sooner, but earlier than it should be. And anthropologists estimate about 3 months earlier, and they think that Neanderthal babies actually had a 12-month gestation, not 9 months like we do.
Oh, wow.
That they were able to manage that because their brains, somehow they managed it. But anyway.
So we gestate for 9 months as human beings, and that technically every baby that's born is premature.
Yeah, that's really it. Neurologically unfinished is the way, academics put it, but that's it. So they come out and they're very dependent. Now, what's really interesting in this story to me is that when all babies cry, of course, and they cry in a certain way. They mostly cry worse in the evening. And one of the people I write about in the book, Our Babies Ourselves, is a guy who was working at the University of Montreal, Ron Barr, pediatrician, and also anthropologically educated, spent time with the Kungsan people in Namibia. And he said he ran a crying clinic in the hospital. And he said people would come in and they say, my baby is crying, blah, 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 blah. He said I'd show them the universal crying curve. And that is a chart that shows that crying increases, and in about 3 to 4 months, it drops off in all babies. And isn't that interesting that it's the same 3 to 4 months that babies should have stayed inside?
Oh, wow.
And he said to me, it's neurological. That now their brains have developed, and so they're sort of right on where they should be, and they don't have to cry as much because they're getting everything they need.
Oh, wow, look at
there
this.
we go. Yeah,
that's
the
fascinating.
universal crying curve. So I said to him, so what do you say to these people? He goes, I show them the curve. And I said, and then what do? He goes, they go, oh, okay. And they go home. And they had come in saying, my baby has colic, blah, blah, blah. He goes, they just go home.
Wow.
And they don't come back.
That is fascinating.
So all this, my baby has colic. What do I do? What do I do? If you just wait, it'll go away.
Yeah, your baby's not supposed to be here. Okay,
Yeah,
they're supposed to be
right.
back inside you. Try to put them back in or something.
Stick them back in. Put them in the toaster oven.
Wow. That makes a lot more sense.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's knowledge we don't know. We don't know as parents. We don't know as, citizens of this culture. And we always assume we're doing something wrong or something is wrong with the baby. And the reality is there's nothing wrong. Nothing at all.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And again, the thing about having our baby that I thought was so cool was doing the reflex testing. And you talked about something in the book about this second phase attritional, I think is the term, that, these babies come out with these reflexes. And they have like a walking reflex, they have a grabbing reflex, they have like this, hanging reflex, all these interesting things that are baked into sort of our, ancestral heritage, our DNA.
Absolutely.
From a time where we were able to come out and be, more precocial. We were born being able to do more things. And because we're premature, we don't necessarily have that to the same degree. Is that a fair explanation?
I think that's fair. And a biological anthropologist and a friend of mine named John Marks has just written a great book about human diversity. And in there he says, we know that we're affected by culture, but we're also affected by development. Everything we do is affected by development, meaning the life stages we go through, being a baby, being a toddler, an adolescent, and an adult, then aging, that whatever we do, our bodies and our minds are affected by that as well.
Yeah. I'm curious, how long do other primates gestate for? Like a macaque?
Well, I know macaques, it's 4.5 months.
4.5 months.
I mean,
okay.
they're really small,
Right. And I
elephants are really long.
Yeah, I think elephants are like 2 years or something.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot to do with body size, I think.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm curious, is there a curve to chart, gestational length and any other type of factor?
I'm sure there is, but I'm not familiar with it.
Interesting.
I'm sure there is,
So now thinking about little babies, right, that they basically all are premature.
Yep.
And once they get here, they're still so brand new and they don't even really understand what's going on, right? How does that change the way that we interact with them? Like, how does that change the way that parents should be looking at their 1-month-old or their 2-month-old? And how, some of the decisions that they make in that early developmental period.
Yeah. I want to put a little bit about the cross-cultural in here, because the way we in the United States and Western culture, the way we interact with a newborn is very different across the world. I mean, there are cultures where people don't speak to newborn babies. They think it's stupid, because the baby can't talk, so just wait. But then it turns out that all the siblings and the other kids around they talk to the baby. So they're still learning language and how to talk with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think my impression of most Americans is that everybody is afraid of their baby more than anything. And the funny part is, in Dr. Spock's book that sort of revolutionized parenting in I don't know when that was, the 1950s or something, the first line is, "You know more than you think you do." And even though he went on to tell people what to do, and I think that's it, that our instincts, our reactions are, unless you're someone who is very, very anxious and doesn't trust your own reactions, it's there. If, let's say, you're in a grocery store and you hear a baby screaming, I react to that. I mean, I do want to go over, push the mother out of the way and pick up the baby. I've never done that, but I would like to do that. And I think that fear stops people sometimes. It's just an opinion. I've never collected data on this or anything, that people are afraid almost to be physical with their babies, to pick them up and hold them all the time because they have their grandmother or somebody saying, "Don't pick that baby up," because you'll just spoil it. And there's a long history of that from like the 20s and the 30s of don't touch the baby, don't pick it up, and the crying out business. What is the point? The baby is screaming. That's a signal. And that's all the baby has. It can't talk yet. And it is telling you, as Ron Barr would put it, that something is off balance. Something is wrong. That they just feel like something's wrong. It could be food. It could be their diaper's wet. It could be they just feel weird. And what they're craving is contact. And so I'm a big proponent of carrying your baby all the time, because if you do travel in other countries and you see babies always strapped to somebody, you never hear crying.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare. And Americans always think, well, then you'll spoil that child. And it will never become independent like we want it to be. Well, research shows that is not true at all. In fact, they followed some little kids who did co-sleeping until they were in kindergarten. They didn't necessarily co-sleep to kindergarten, but they followed them till kindergarten. And those kids turned out to be more independent and more self-reliant. They had a sense of security. Whereas I think that in American culture, we bring up anxious people. And part of that is forcing babies to sleep on their own and not finding, it's not that you necessarily have to sleep with your baby, but compromises in which there's more tactile, sensory, hand the baby to somebody else. And we also have a problem because we don't have big extended families much anymore.
Right.
Some people do, and they're the lucky ones.
Right.
I had a graduate student for a while who worked with the Yanomami in the Amazonian rainforest, and she was just telling me about her life there. And they live in these long houses, and so an extended family is all sleeping together, and nobody sleeps through the night. People wake up, they go to sleep. We have this thing in Western culture that if you don't sleep through the night, something's wrong with you. But in fact, humans are biphasic sleepers. They normally wake up in the middle of the night. But the trick is then you take a nap in the afternoon, and we don't allow that.
Right.
So we've made that the workday is more important. But anyway, I said to her, what happens in the middle of the night when a baby is crying? And she said, oh, let's just hand it off to whoever is awake. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you had 25 people that you could just turn to and turn this baby? Because that's the other pressure we experience in Western culture, is just there are usually one or two people taking care of that baby.
Yeah.
And that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it really does take a village.
Let's talk about sleeping. So
Okay.
I want to talk about baby carrying in a second, which is fascinating. But sleeping, again, I think that's one of the first things that you're sort of doing with your newborn. Like, our baby's born, and my wife and I kind of looked at each other, and the midwife left, and the doula left, and we were all alone in our apartment. We just looked at each other like, all right, well, I guess we'll go to bed. It's so crazy. And again, so many little things come into question as to what should we do. And I read your book, so I was very fortunate because I feel like I had some information. A couple things. One, could you explain what co-sleeping is And then could you also explain sleep training and sort of like the, what people would call the cry it out method or self-soothing, and why these things have kind of come into culture, and what your opinion on these different sort of sleep styles are?
The interesting background to that is that when my daughter was born in 1997, those words didn't exist. Co-sleeping, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
what was it like?
Nobody talked about it at all. They never talked about sleeping. I think the assumption was you put the baby in the crib, and nobody ever talked about it. And in fact, my oldest sister, and her children are now way grown-ups, she once said to me, I always slept with my kids. It was the happiest time of my life, and I never told anyone, because she knew.
It's controversial.
It's controversial. And I think part of the reason it's controversial is that in Western culture, we, at least in America, we have infused the bed with sexuality. And so, oh my God, you can't sleep with your children because that's where you have sex. And one time I was giving a talk to about, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of people, and I was talking about this and saying, something, and some woman in the back yelled out, you can always have sex in the living room. And everybody burst out laughing, because we have sort of idolized the bedroom as that's mom and dad's, or, mom and mom's, or dad and dad's. That's their sacred place.
Oh, that's interesting.
But in other cultures, people sleep together.
Right.
A professor at Cornell said in Nepal, one day she just wanted to go take a nap by herself. And she went in and laid down. And sure enough, somebody came in and laid down right next to her because they didn't want her to be lonely. But we have this thing that's part of our belief system.
That's hilarious.
You should sleep alone. You should sleep through the night.
Yeah, I mean, even just you saying this, I'm like, yeah, I believe that. As an American, like as someone who grew up in America, I'm like, yeah, you sleep alone. Like, why? Like, if I took a nap somewhere and someone joined me, I'd be like, whoa, are you making a sexual advance?
Exactly.
That would be my first thought.
That's right.
And it's imprinted on me culturally.
And these deep-seated belief systems, which we all have, I have them, we all have them, they are really hard to change. It's part of our socialization that we do this. And again, the only way you know any different is to read or travel to another country. Anyway, so when I wrote the book, and then the book came out, and somebody called me for an interview and said, what do you think about attachment parenting? And I had never heard that word before. And I said, what other kind is there? And I didn't realize that was going to be like a big thing.
Right.
And then how I got into the understanding of what we now call co-sleeping is through my truly fine anthropological friend, Jim McKenna, who I interview in the book, and I went to his sleep lab. He's another former primate behaviorist who became interested in infant sleep when he had a little baby boy. And he said, his name is Jeff, and he said, I would be rocking Jeff standing up, and then I'd lie down, put him down to go to sleep, and he'd cry. And he said, and this happened over and over. But for Jim McKenna, this was an interesting thing, and he began to dig into it. And he went to University of California, Irvine. He said he went to the neurology department. He knocked on the first door, and he found someone to collaborate and do EKGs and sleep studies with mothers and babies who didn't normally sleep together. So he wired them up. And then he and this other person would stay up all night, and they had an infrared camera on them. And he said, and I saw some of the films of women who normally didn't sleep with their babies, and in their sleep, they are patting the baby, moving the covers, comforting the baby, and the mother and the baby are face to face. So Jim spent decades studying this, especially at Notre Dame when he was in the anthropology department, and he had a baby parent sleep lab. And so he has lots of data. And his final conclusions are that human infants are designed to not be alone at night. And normally, if you're breastfeeding, you have to breastfeed through the night. Well, what a pain if you have to get up from bed and walk in another room, get the baby, even go over to a crib. He said it's just so much easier if you're co-sleeping. A woman naturally turns towards the baby, and the baby finds the mother's breasts. And he has the film to show this. And so we've gone to a system where babies are often bottle fed. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I was bottle fed, and I seem to be okay. But we've kind of disconnected that contact point at night, because we have a belief system that if you don't do that, if you don't regulate the baby's sleep, it will never sleep alone and it will never sleep through the night. And that is untrue. But we've got it in our heads. Or the idea that if you sleep the baby, you will roll over on it and kill it. And that will, it'll be sudden infant death. But if you look at the real reports of sudden infant death, there is often an explanation, and it usually has to do with, awful things like the baby's crib is way too close to the radiator, or, the covers, the baby got tangled in the covers. And so you have to, be prudent about this.
Morbid obesity is another one.
The
drug
smoking,
and alcohol use.
Sleeping on a sofa. Which I did with my daughter. And when I read that, I was like, oh no. But it's sort of common sense things. But culturally, we've also disconnected sleeping with a child. Like, you just aren't supposed to do that. And Jim looked at the history of that. And he said it really comes from, I don't remember the dates exactly, but not medieval times, but later, when poor people were killing their babies, infanticide, because they just couldn't deal with it. And so they would say, oh, I must have rolled over on the baby, but it turned out it wasn't true. And he had slides of these sort of odd kind of lobster traps that people put in their beds and put the baby in it so that they wouldn't roll over on it. And one of the lines, we used to give talks together, and one of the lines he would say to people is, how many people sleep with your dog? And, a lot of people raise their hand and they go, do you ever worry about rolling over and killing your dog? And people just go, no.
But it feels like a dog has a little more agency. They can run away.
It feels like it, but you can try it. And this is actually sort of a fun thing to do. If you're going to have a baby, get a doll about the same size, put it in, and find out if you roll over it, because I'm guarantee you won't. You won't, because you are conscious of it. And you're still going to wake up every couple of hours because the baby's hungry. Yeah.
We had read there's a protocol for co-sleeping now. I'm not exactly sure where it came from. Christos, would you mind pulling up like the 7 rules for co-sleeping? And it's sort of the things that you discuss in the book. Like if, avoid these things, like don't swaddle. That way the baby can sort of brace.
Don't be drunk.
Exactly. Don't be doing drugs or alcohol, and even drugs like a sleep aid. Like if you're taking some type of sleep medication,
absolutely
that would count. This is not like illicit drug use only. And then like morbid obesity, things like that. And I think Christos is going to pull up that list because I think it's interesting to look at. But anytime I tell people like, we originally got like a bassinet to have the baby sort of next to us. But anytime we talk about this, people get very concerned. They say, oh, what about sudden infant death syndrome? You're going to roll over on the baby. They won't be able to do anything. Baby on their back. Don't overheat. Couch sleeping.
Well, that's really interesting. And Jim would say this, the baby on the back thing. When I was a baby, you put the baby on its stomach. All right. And then it came along and babies would vomit and choke on it and die.
On their stomach.
On their stomach. So there was a campaign, I don't remember when this was, it wasn't that long ago, putting babies on their backs. And the number of SIDS deaths dropped dramatically. And Jim said to me, isn't it interesting that one behavioral change had such an incredible effect on infant mortality?
Yeah, it's interesting. Putting the baby on the back, you had another moment in the book where you discuss that babies that sleep on their stomach seem to sleep longer and harder, which is a really interesting finding.
Which is not good.
But it's very counterintuitive because you read it and you go, don't you want your baby to sleep long and you want them to sleep well? You say, of course. We'll put them on their stomach and they'll sleep very long and very well. But then you realize it's actually beneficial for babies to be mildly waking up and doing this active sleep. Can you talk about active sleeping and why that's good for babies?
And this, again, is Jim's work. He had all kinds of, devices on people. And I would say to him, but these women come in and they're going to sleep with their baby for the first time. And like, how do they sleep? He goes, they sleep like a dream. And he said, I think it's because they know someone's watching. So they're not afraid. They've got these scientists, behind a window
Right.
who are watching them. And he said what he discovered is that these mothers and infants go through what he calls a sleeping tango. So there are 4 levels of sleep, including REM sleep, and they go through a level of sleep, and they might be able to find that too, I don't know, but for a visual. So that, let's say the baby goes through the levels of sleep and then goes down, then the mother follows, or the mother goes through a level, the baby follows, like a tango, and that they really are entwined in their different levels of sleep. And he has said it's basically teaching the baby how to sleep.
Fascinating.
Isn't it?
That the baby and the mom, their brain waves are basically syncing up.
They're syncing up. And if the baby has an apnea, it stops breathing. And if the mother is facing, the mother is breathing out CO2, and that triggers the baby to breathe again. Yeah, it's pretty awesome work.
Wow. Evolution is really clever, huh?
Yeah, it's really clever.
Call it God, call it nature.
That's
Figured
right.
it out.
That's right. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
But without the scientific experiments, if you want to call them that, or observations, we wouldn't even know that. We'd just go with that.
Yeah.
We'd go with, the baby should be it'll breathe better if it's by its own, but it's not true.
Yeah, so interesting. And again, I think the Western notion is that you put the baby in a crib, maybe in the room, but distant from you, or then eventually in its own separate room.
That's right, because
And
that's safe.
That's safer.
And also, they'll grow up to be,
more independent.
more
And
independent.
they'll be a CEO or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not a good time to be a CEO.
No. Is that what you want? Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting
There's
concept.
also,
though.
let me add in here, there's also the other side of that is the number of people who choose not to co-sleep because they don't sleep well when they're sleeping with a little kid, or with a baby. And sometimes they don't sleep well with a partner. Some couples who sleep in separate beds or separate rooms because they just don't sleep well. Well, if you think about it, since we never did this co-sleeping thing for people of my generation, that didn't happen. It's so odd in this culture that we put a baby in its own room, in its own bed, and then at 18, 20, 25, they have a partner and they're expected to sleep with someone for the first time in their life.
Interesting.
So, of course, they don't know how to sleep with another person.
Right.
You've seen those ads for the beds that have 2 separate things and 2 separate duvets and 2 separate whatever, because people really don't know how to sleep with other people. But, if you come from Nepal, you could probably lay down to sleep with anybody at any time, Because, again, sleeping is it's so culturally influenced in this culture, and it isn't in other cultures. And we have all these sleep problems, insomnia, everything, and that isn't true for other places.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do babies know when you put them down? Because my baby does this. He'll fall asleep on me in 2 seconds, and the second I put him down, he's crying.
Yeah.
How does he know that I'm not holding him?
Your heartbeat and your warmth. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
When you think about if he's on your chest, his head is probably turned, and he's right over your heartbeat. Mm-hmm. They know.
And is there a pheromonal element that they can smell?
I don't know.
me?
I would assume so.
Right.
I would assume so, yeah. We always think humans don't have a very good sense of smell, but we still have one. We're not cats, we're not dogs, but we still have one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's another element, I don't remember if it's in the book or if I had read this elsewhere, that as babies are sort of active sleeping, like they're kind of, startling themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think parents sometimes get frustrated by this because they're like, my baby was perfectly sound asleep and then he startled himself and then he woke up. This is bad. I should put him on his stomach and that way he'll sleep longer and not startle himself. And I'm curious what your thoughts on this are, that sometimes the startle reflex can get worked out by going through it. By these babies startling themselves, they're able to kind of calm their sympathetic nervous system and not startle themselves as much. And as a result, by active sleeping and occasionally startling themselves and falling back asleep, they are less anxious later in life.
I don't know about that work, but what you're saying makes perfect sense to me, that we are learning animals, much of what we do. And so there's a lot of practice. It's back to that issue of development. It surely is part of development. And Ron Barr talked to me a lot about the terrible twos and good luck with that. A friend of mine in Ithaca said her son, he just had a meltdown, like on the street. And I said, what did you do? And he was like 2. She said, oh, I got him off the sidewalk and I put him on the grass so he wouldn't hurt himself. And then I just stood there and waited for him to get over it, so he wouldn't hurt himself, because this is sort of a normal thing. And Ron says it's just part of development, and it's part of that, the brain starting to sort itself out, and it's not your fault and it's not their fault, and you just live through it, sort of like puberty. You live through that too.
Yeah, I'm excited for that one as
well.
well.
Sure. Yeah. Good luck. Yeah.
And I guess similarly, babies don't know that they're separate from the mother's body.
They don't.
That's a fascinating concept as well.
And they aren't.
Yeah, right.
That's very true. As Jim puts it, well, actually it wasn't him. A pediatrician who's long dead said that there's not just a baby. There's a baby in someone. Because they're so neurologically unfinished, there has to be somebody else on the outside. And as adults, we are designed really to respond to that crying. And that's why we have a reaction to it. If we didn't, and there are cases when people don't, and that's a real problem.
Yeah.
There was a really nice piece of work that was done at Boston Children a long time ago where they took babies, I don't remember how old they were, a couple months old, and they put them like in a car seat. And then they would have the mother go in and they would be doing this sort of interaction with hands and, and everything. The baby would be all happy. And the women had an earbud in their ear. And the researcher would say from the other room, okay, now give the baby a dead affect. So the woman would just change her face and stare at the baby and not respond to the baby reaching out. And the baby, every baby that they tried this, I think it was 90 seconds, the baby would keep trying and then it would just go limp and turn its face away. And even more interesting, then the researcher would say, okay, be yourself again. And the mother would be herself interacting, and the baby didn't respond right away because it was pissed.
Wow.
Or scared or unsure. And it was the same for all the babies they tried. So they really are born ready and waiting for that kind of interaction. That's how they learn.
Yeah.
And how they regulate themselves. They can't regulate themselves by themselves. They have to do it with us.
I had a conversation on this show with a gentleman named Sebastian Younger.
I know who he is.
He's brilliant. I love Sebastian. And he made a comment, and the clip actually went fairly viral. I was kind of surprised by it, where he said that human beings are the only mammals that don't sleep with their children. Specifically in the West.
That's right. He's also a great writer, but
he's brilliant.
Yeah.
Human beings in the West are the only mammals that don't sleep with their babies.
That's exactly right.
As soon as you put it in that context, I was like, huh.
Isn't that odd?
It's a little dumb.
So you have a dog, you have a cat, you have a litter of kittens, you see them all snuggling there, they're all sleeping together in a ball, and then you think, but I can't sleep with my baby, because I'll ruin it psychologically or something. Or, It's pretty twisted.
Yeah. So now there's this thing in the West, and maybe not only the West, but I say the West sort of as an encompassing term for this, progressive sort of scientific ideal of sleep training and this notion of cry it out, which is effectively you put your child on a sort of rigorous sleeping program where they're awake for a certain amount of hours and asleep for a certain amount of hours. And I think that amount varies depending on sort of the philosophy you kind of take up with this. Which is nice because it gives the parents a lot of autonomy and time, and their schedule is more or less organized. Which, if you're working a job and you have a 9 to 5 as a mother, it's probably very important that your baby's on a more regular sleep cycle. And that often includes, putting them into a separate room so they can sleep independently, they can learn to be independent. And if they cry, there's an idea known as cry it out, where you sort of let them continue to cry until eventually they self-soothe. Is there anything
which is a really funny word to me? Self-soothe?
Right.
I mean, if you think about adults, how do we self-soothe? Well, let's see. alcohol, drugs, sex, shopping,
my favorite
dancing,
things.
music. Right. And to think that that's a good thing,
Right.
that's very cultural. That you should be able to take care of yourself in your worst moments when you're unhappy. I think that's really wacky. If you look across other cultures, people don't do that. They're more connected. Not across the board, but you could say that. And whenever I hear that term, I think you really want a 2-month-old somehow to teach itself to self-soothe. It's a nice word for teach itself to stop crying and fall asleep because it's exhausted. And, I have a reaction to this, and I know that's really hard on people, and I really have no right to tell other people what to do in this. But I don't think there's, and I might be wrong, that there's any research. It'd be great to know if you took the babies that went through this kind of quote unquote sleep training and see what they're like at 18. I think that would be really interesting because I could be wrong. Maybe it's perfectly fine. I'm sure that happened to me as a baby, but I had lots of siblings. So I was never, ever alone, ever. But I just don't get it, basically, you know. And I've had mothers say to me, mothers who work, and they say, I sleep with my baby because I don't get to see him during the day. And that's a way to make up for lost time during the day. Because if you're coming home from work and then you're doing whatever the family's doing that evening and you're exhausted and you go to bed and you put the baby alone and you get up and you go back to work. But you could have had, 7 hours with that baby. But I know these are really sort of culturally unacceptable ideas that I have at some level. And people, they may try it for a night and don't like it or whatever. But we have a primacy of going to work and the intimacy of the partners, adults, over the baby, rather than trying to compromise and integrate all those things. And, I just sound like, a privileged academic when I say those things. But I've met enough people who have figured out compromises, who have incorporated. I knew a woman at Cornell who was an older student, and she was pregnant when she took my primate class. And she and her husband, who was a student, and they had 2 other kids, they patched together, relatives. It's a shame we have to do this in American culture, that there's no other, state-funded daycare or anything. And they patched together a system of different people, some that they paid, some who were friends. And I so admired them for going to all that trouble to try to figure out how to do it. And sometimes people just can't figure it out. They just have to do what they have to do. People, especially who have manual labor jobs and are exhausted, And so in reality, people have to work it out for themselves. And it's not like every single thing you do to your baby is going to, positive or negative, is going to affect them for the rest of their life, unless something, truly terrible and traumatic. But, basically, we all kind of make these decisions as we go. As a friend said to me when my daughter was a baby, and I was trying to decide between cloth and paper diapers, because, I lived in Ithaca, which is called the Berkeley of the East, and it was like, oh, the shame I'm going to get from people. And she just looked at me and she said, this is one of many compromises you will be making.
Right.
And that has stuck with me. My daughter's an adult now. It's one of many compromises you will make, and you will never be a perfect parent by your own judgment or anybody else's.
Right.
And you will make mistakes and you'll make bad judgments. But, it's the greatest roller coaster ride in the world as far as I'm concerned. But,
Absolutely. On the idea of getting more sleep and being tired, I mean, I've just found on a personal basis, which is, again, is an anecdote, a sample size of one.
One. Yeah, an N of one. Yeah.
And, we've been sleeping great. And our baby is,
Don't tell that to any other parent.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully they're not listening.
We were very lucky, and I would say privileged to have this, because I was an academic, I was older, and I had tenure. here. Nobody could touch me. And so I could, and my ex-husband, my daughter's father, is a carpenter, a contractor, and worked for himself. So we just very quietly divided it up 50-50. And I would go to the university Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And he would work Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And the person who had to take care of the baby, the person who had to go to work, got to sleep by themselves. So they went downstairs and slept by themselves.
Hilarious.
And I hesitate to say that because we were lucky that we could do that, and most people can't.
Right.
And a lot of that had to do is that I was an older parent and my career was established. And so there was no risk for me. And that's very, very unusual.
Yeah.
People having their babies in their 20s, their 30s, or even younger, it's much more critical on what they have to do.
That's the other thing. Having babies young, I mean, I'm 28, so in the scope of humanity, probably not actually that young. But I guess in New York standards, pretty young. And I feel it's great. Like I still have like some dumb young man years where I can just be awake for a lot of nights and not feel it as much. You know what I mean? Like I think once I'm in my 30s, 40s, like the hangover will start to hit. That you lose like 4 hours of sleep and you're like, I have to go away for a week. Right. So I feel pretty good. But sleeping with the baby in our bed, one of the nice things about that is the ability to breastfeed in the night. And so not having to get up. And so as a result, my wife is just able to kind of like lean over, baby's happy, and then everyone goes back to sleep. Yeah. And, when thinking about, sleep training, like, I want to get the optimal amount of sleep, the most amount of sleep as a parent, it's kind of counterintuitive again, but having the baby with you can actually offer more sleep because the baby's more placated. Yeah.
And I think that speaks back to sleep in general being such a problem in America and probably most of Western culture, because we've made this day where 24 hours where you're supposed to work during the day, and then you do whatever you do in the evening, and then you're supposed to sleep. And if you don't sleep 8 hours, who came up with 8 hours, then there's something wrong with you. And it'd be nice if we got over that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, in most cultures, people take a nap.
Yeah.
And if you go, I remember being in Indonesia and Bali, and, in the afternoon, all the shops were closed and they weren't having lunch like in Italy. They were sleeping behind the counter. And if you walked in, somebody would wake up and go. And I thought, this is awesome.
It's nice, right? It feels
really
a bit more human-centric.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have people conforming to a society that's sick, thinking that they're healthy.
Yeah.
I want to ask about baby wearing. And also about breastfeeding, which is two very, very interesting topics from an anthropological perspective. Is there anything else about sleeping that you wanted to underpin before we move on to that section? I
don't think so. Only for your listeners out there, just do some reading and and trust yourself about that, and you'll figure it out. Yeah. And the baby will be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would read resources, whether you're going to, sleep train or have the baby in like a sidecar or in the bed, and just kind of, do your own personal research on the best ways to do that and if it fits your lifestyle.
I'm guessing that when you go through the teenage years, I think as a parent, you begin to understand how little control you have over everything. And I think there's a fantasy that when you have a baby, you are in control.
Right.
And Americans do love their control.
Absolutely.
We are not relaxed about these things. And if you can take a step back and think, and also that old adage, the days are long, but the years are quick. It's so absolutely true. Yeah. And it changes. That's my biggest piece of advice. Whatever is upsetting you or trying you or exhausting you today, I guarantee you it will change.
It's so short. It really is. And another great piece of advice that I had heard when it comes to young babies is try to be more of a gardener and less of a carpenter. Yeah. You have this human being that comes with its own personality and its own ideas, and you can sort of mold it and shape it in certain ways, obviously, by being a great parent. But they will just be sort of how they are. Yeah. And trying to nurture that and cultivate that is oftentimes, again, I don't really have a ton of experience or advice to be giving on the topic, but I find that with like even my nieces and nephews, cultivating the spirit of the human is typically more beneficial than trying to mold them into what you think they should be.
That's right, because you really have no control.
Yeah.
You think you do. You have influence, but
Sure.
you don't have any control. And when my daughter was a teenager, I never read parenting books, but somebody gave me one, and it said, okay, your job is over when they're adolescents, and anything you've been trying to teach them about right or wrong, morality, whatever, and here's what you shouldn't do. Don't criticize their hair, their clothing, their friends, or their music, and your job is only about drugs and alcohol. And that's what you have to, safety is your only job.
You're now an ethicist.
Yeah,
You're trying to instill morality.
That's really it. And so you do have influence, and you hope for the best, but they are also human beings, and nobody's controlling you. So why do you think you're controlling them?
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to discuss a couple more topics, but really quick, we're going to hear from our sponsors that make this show possible, and we'll be back in just a second. If you have any questions for my dear friend Dr. Small, a.k.a. Meredith, on the streets, as we know her. Just one of the homies, Meredith. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. This is like one of my favorite topics. I love anthropology, so this is so fun. We'll be back in just a second. Hey guys, really quick, did you know that on this day in history in 1582, Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar, which most of the world still uses today? Or that in 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, into orbit? This event triggered the space race between the USA and the USSR. I learned these facts pretty recently, actually, on the S'more Camp newsletter. That's right, S'more Camp, the inner sanctum. For this kind of show, we do a ton of research. I have different researchers and friends that help me find information, and not everything can make the episode. Either it's like too crazy, it's too like weird or gory, and it will get demonetized on YouTube, or it's just additional and it doesn't always make it, but it always makes it into the S'more Camp Inner Sanctum newsletter. So if you are interested in expanding your mind, learning new information, and being the most interesting person into every room you step into, check it out in the description or this QR code right here. Now let's get back to the show. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because if you're anything like me, you're probably running late all the time. I am. I'm always leaving right when I'm supposed to be somewhere, and I never have time to sit down and grab a nutritious meal. And that's why I want to talk to you about this little product right here called Huel. Huel is absolutely amazing. It's got everything you need, all the essential vitamins and minerals, all the nutrients, all the protein you need in a regular meal packaged in this beautiful, convenient little bottle. That's right. No more of the days of you running out the door being like, oh, I'll just grab some fast food or something. Oh, I'll have like, the leftover cheeseburger in the fridge. No. With Huel, it's healthy, nutritious, everything you need to power through the day served in this little bottle right here. I mean, this has got 35 grams of protein, 7 grams of fiber, 27 vitamins and minerals. Everything's right on the back. And this will help you get through the day. It'll help you perform better, not only in the workplace, but also in the gym. I mean, at this point, I think they've sold over 400 million meals. I mean, is it 400 million? I mean, that's amazing. 400 million meals. So why not you? Take control of your health, be a little bit more time efficient, and get all the essentials that you need in every little bottle. If you're interested, go to Huel.com, use the promo code CAMP. That's Huel, Huel.com. Use the promo code CAMP and get 15% off your first order. Check it out right now. Get control of your health, get control of your life, and stop being so late. Let's just fix that also. Be on time, all right? Set an alarm. Let's get back to the show. And we're back. Thank you all so much. We're here live with Dr. Meredith Small. We have a question. When a baby's first born, can they see ghosts? Nathan, that's an excellent question. All right. What say you, anthropologist? What do we think? Can they see ghosts?
Well, it's hard to say because they can't tell us, can they?
Oh, that's a good point. They might be. That's why they're crying.
Could be.
They see ghosts and they're so scared.
But the question is, what kind of ghost? Who is it? Who is it?
Someone haunting the house from years ago.
Some ancestor or someone haunting the house.
Oh my goodness! See, but maybe the ghost can babysit. That's what we really should do. It takes a village.
Let me. I'll quickly tell you about my friend Alma Gottlieb, who's a cultural anthropologist, lived for years with the Beng people of Ivory Coast, and they have a whole different idea of where babies come from. They come from. We would think of it as like reincarnation, but it's not that. It's a pre-life. And that they are alive and well there. I'm sure I'm not saying this right, but it's WEANG. URGBE, I think. Anyway, and they have a name and they have parents. And then when they're born, they are not officially into this world until their umbilical cord falls off. And so the new parents do a lot of things, ointments and stuff to get that umbilical stump to fall off because they want the baby to stay. And if the baby cries a lot, they take it to a diviner, spiritual diviner, who says, this baby's not happy and it wants to go back to the other parents. And the way to make it happier is to give it money and jewelry, which sounds pretty good to me. And so the babies come from, they're fully formed. They're people already.
Wow.
Isn't that fabulous?
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder how that changes the psychology of how you raise your kids, being like, this is our kid right now, but it used to be someone else's kid, and we're just having them for this little moment.
I better be a good parent.
Yeah, or else we're going to get our asses kicked.
It's
by the other
also
parents.
spiritually a good way to deal with, infant and child death is about 50% in a lot of cultures. And so when you have your babies are dying a lot, this is a way to deal with grief as well. I mean, I'm just projecting that, but it just seems that way to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I want to ask you about baby wearing. Again, for a lot of people that don't have kids, or maybe they'll never have kids, they're not interested. This concept of baby wearing is really fascinating to me because in my mind, again, as an American, I go, you have a baby, you put them in a stroller, and you push them around in the stroller. And it's like, duh, that's exactly what you're supposed to do with babies. And then I was thinking about it, I was reading your book. I was like, wait a second, strollers have only been around 150 years? Like, if you look,
I don't know, but yeah.
The scope of human beings as, these bipedal hominids with the same brains we have right now, that if that's this much, we've had strollers for such a small amount. So I guess my question is, what did people do when they didn't have strollers, and what do they do today in places that they don't have access to strollers?
Pretty simple. It's a piece of cloth. And tied, I brought one back from Bali. It's this long piece of cloth, and whatever they've got, a towel, anything. And if you were to go, let's say, to East Africa, you would see that all babies are carried all the time. And part of the advantage is for breastfeeding, the baby's wiggling around and finding the breast once they can wiggle. Mm-hmm. And, the breast is getting stretched out for sure. But this way women go about their business, and their business is growing things in the fields and, bending over a lot and weeding and that sort of thing, taking things to market, whatever. And also by carrying a baby all the time, somebody else can do it. So the baby can be handed off. And the reality is, around the world, 90% of childcare is done by other children. It's not done by adults. And when people go to, foreign countries, people have come back and said to me, I couldn't believe it. This 10-year-old is carrying a baby. And I go, yeah, but that 10-year-old has been doing that forever. And also, well, there we go. And also, but that looks like somebody from medieval times, doesn't it? Anyway, but also, there are always adults around. So when a child is doing childcare, there are monitors. There's somebody there. There are adults, grandparents, other people in the village, whatever. So they're not totally by themselves. My personal experience is we never had a stroller. I think they're more trouble than they're worth, actually. And just recently, my daughter was telling me that she's just sick and tired of the strollers in the subway. People going down the stairs, going up. And even worse, go spend some time in Venice, where I go a lot, 400 bridges. And people with a stroller taking up the whole bridge, and then they walk 50 feet and they have to do it again.
Yeah, not ADA accessible. We got to do that. We got to change some of Venice. We got to tear it down and make it ADA accessible. That would be...
That's right. Bring in the cars.
Exactly.
And so I always found it very easy. And we had a sling kind of thing for my daughter, and then eventually a backpack, and as she got bigger, I just make my husband carry her. And then sometimes she'd just sit on his shoulders. I have pictures of them in foreign countries, and she's just sitting on his shoulders. And I just think people think a stroller is really convenient, but I don't get it. myself. And they do like motion, I admit to, putting my daughter in the car and driving around to get her to sleep,
Right.
that happened to me once. But it's a very interesting thing. It'd be fun to look up the history of the when strollers came about, and now there are those umbrella strollers, that you can that are really simple.
Well, there's actually I've seen them back in, I think this is like around Industrial Revolution, kind of turn of the century time.
Yeah.
They had like sort of like baby carriage, prototypes, but they also had this thing that I thought was so cute. It's a little wheel with a seat.
Oh.
And then there's like a handle on it.
Oh,
and
wow.
so this is for like toddlers. And so they can kind of sit on like the little like wheel seat, and the parents can kind of wheel them around. I was like, oh, it's so cool.
Well, someone recently asked me, a young person asked me, in all the time when you didn't have a stroller and you were carrying your daughter, did you ever have a time when you wish you had two hands? And I went, I did have two hands, because with a front pack or something, your hands are free. And just at that instant, when we were having that conversation, a woman came down the street the other way. She had her baby in a front pack, and she was holding 2 bags of groceries.
Hilarious.
And I went, see?
Yeah.
It isn't like that. I never found it to be a burden in any kind of way.
Yeah.
I just liked it, and it seemed easier. I mean, there are photographs of me vacuuming the house with my daughter on my back. I just, only when she got older, but then she could walk.
Right.
So, I mean, most babies walk around 1. So by the time they're 2.
Now, let's say someone listening, they say, well, I think the stroller is more convenient. They like the stroller better.
So what?
Is there any neurological or developmental benefits to baby carrying over stroller?
I don't think anyone's ever studied that, but intuitively, I would think that the baby is more comfortable and will cry less because it's having physical contact.
That heartbeat, the smell, the warmth.
Yeah. And you could say, and Ron Barr's work with the San about crying, that all babies around the world cry the same number of times during the day. But Western babies cry longer per bout. So we put up with a lot of crying. And what Ron Barr would say, it's because we don't carry our kids. And if you carry them, you have less crying.
And for what reason specifically? You can nurture them, you can soothe them quicker.
And they're quieter because they feel your warmth, your heartbeat, and they feel the motion as you're walking along. And that's how most babies in the world are dealt with.
The motion element is really interesting, that babies are gestating and forming from an embryo to a its own self-sustaining organism in the womb of a woman, swaying back and forth, walking around, feeling motion,
running,
hearing the heartbeat of their mom.
Yeah.
And then we expect them to not like the same environment when they're outside the womb.
Yeah.
It seems a little...
Yeah. And then we have the invention of the car seat, which, of course, we need for safety reasons. But I always, judgmentally would say the worst invention was the pop-out car seat, where you can, just take it out of and then you're just carrying it into the house, and then you put it on the counter, Or maybe those mechanical seats where the baby is going back and forth and back and forth like that, which is giving it the kind of motion that would, I'm just speaking from personal experience here, and I thought it was easier.
Yeah. I'd read that there's some potential neurological development benefits from baby carrying.
Oh, that's probably true.
Is that as you're carrying them, they are moving, and I guess their sort of motor function is getting a little bit more dialed, kind of in the way that active sleeping is kind of helping them learn how to sleep. I guess by moving and swaying, they're again having like a little bit of surprise, and they're neurologically they're able to reach milestones. I have to double check the research. I don't know if Christos is able to look anything up on this.
This past from when I wrote my 2 books on childcare. But as you say this, my daughter never fell. Well, she walked at 1, and she didn't even do the grab onto things. She just walked across the room, and all her little friends had scraped knees, and she just never fell. And she's always had an incredible sense of balance. And I don't think I ever connected it to the possibility, the hypothesis that maybe it was because she was carried all the time.
Yeah, I need to double check where this
That's
research
very
is from.
interesting.
I'm again, I don't want to say with full certainty that that's
And she's
exactly what
also
it is.
brilliant, so I'm sure everything I did was perfect. Yeah.
But it's it's an interesting thing that, again, when I hear it, I'm like, oh, this kind of makes sense. If that's what human beings have been doing for, eons, then it tracks that it would continue to help. And then there's also the developmental component of constantly holding and wearing your baby. The head shape, which is another fascinating thing that I never really considered until I had a baby. That babies that are left on their backs, either sleeping or not sleeping.
They have to have operations. I forget what the name of that operation, where they get a flat head in the back.
Right.
And then there's an operation that has become more and more popular because they have a flat head.
And they have
such
these soft fontanelles in their cranium that are still forming and fusing.
Oh, yeah. They don't close for a long time.
Yeah, that leaving them on their backs, they can actually change the shape of their heads. Which, again, is one of those things I was like, oh.
Well, you must know about people in different cultures long ago, like it might be the Incas or the Aztecs, I'm not sure. And they wrap the skull, and the skull deforms because bone is plastic.
Right.
If you break your arm and you don't have it done well, there we go. Plagiocephaly. I don't know.
Wow. Yeah. Are you able to pull up an image, Christos, of the baby head wrapping and how it actually changes the shape? There's these fascinating fossils. I'm sure you've seen them.
Yeah.
They're wild.
Right. And it's done for beauty.
Right. Is that still done?
No, I don't think so.
It's an interesting little historical feature where you look at these heads, and I've heard different theories. People are like, oh, this is evidence of extraterrestrial life and things like that.
It doesn't change brain function at all.
How fascinating, right? The malleability of the human brain, that you can change the shape of the vessel, but the thing itself still is functional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
because
remarkable.
your bone tissue is replaced every 12 years. It's constantly growing.
Right.
It is we think of it as the skeleton as being so strong and stiff, but it's actually constantly changing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the baby wearing thing we found very beneficial, and they have such great carriers now. We did sort of the wrap for a while, but now we just have these carriers that are great, and I prefer it. It's also great in the wintertime. Again, living in New York City, I never,
That's true.
The notion of having a baby in a cold place is just so wild to me.
The other thing, we found with our daughter is people in Ithaca would say, "You're the only people we ever see in town who aren't carrying food for their toddler, their baby." And I think this is a more recent development, that whenever a baby or a small child is crying, Americans tend to feed them, with a snack, a healthy snack, but Cheerios, whatever. And I think it never occurred to us to do that. But she didn't fuss like that. We didn't think to give her food when she was fussing, So I'd be interested in some long-term study about the relationship between that new cultural practice and the rates of obesity. I think that would be really interesting.
Oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wanted to ask. I actually forgot to bring this up when we were discussing sleeping. At what point do you believe, based off the anthropological record or looking at other cultures around the world, should a baby be moved out of the bedroom of the parents and have their own sort of sleeping place?
I never. No, I don't. I think you wait for them to tell you. Mm-hmm. But it gets back to that cultural idea that the bedroom is a sacred place for the adult partners. And some people want the baby out of there because that's their intimate space. And, fair enough. But, that's what happened to us. Our daughter said, "No, I'm going to go sleep in my room now."
How old is she, roughly? Do you remember?
Right now?
No. When she... This is last year. She's all right.
I think she was... I don't remember. Maybe 5, 6, something like that.
And she said, I'm going to go
in there. Huh. She had a bedroom. Her dad fixed it up. It was beautiful. And, there's enough with you people. Yeah. But I think also what happens with children who are comfortable sleeping with their parents is they come back if there's a trauma in the household or whatever, and it becomes a comfort place. I think humans in general like to sleep with somebody, and that makes you feel lonely when you're by yourself all the time.
Yeah, again, talking about baby wearing, talking about sleeping, I see all these like TikToks and Instagrams where it'll be, mothers, sort of lamenting or discussing the issue of their baby only wanting to sleep with them or on them. Like, oh, my baby.
Isn't that interesting?
But
and they don't like it.
Well, yeah, and I understand if you have a job, if you have to work, if you have,
right. Or you just brought up as an American.
Sure.
And so your belief system is that the baby begins to feel like a parasite.
Right.
And the reality, it is a parasite, So a friend of mine who used to study chimpanzees in Uganda said when they had their 2 young sons, he said, Americans just complain about parenting all the time. And he said, when people start doing that, we usually say we're having a blast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets lost in all this, all the things that you have to decide about. Should we go sleep? Should we carry? It becomes such a conundrum. And I think that what gets lost in that are the moments of wonder and joy and just... No, it's not all good. Some of it is really, really hard. Jim McKenna, again, the co-sleeping guy, and I were giving a talk, and he gave his whole presentation. And then a question afterwards, a woman raised her hand, and she said, I feed my son, and then I put him down, and he cries, and I feed him, and then I put him down. And Jim said, I just spoke for an hour about why that is. And evolution didn't promise you a rose garden. Like, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
That's what it is. We expect our jobs to be hard. Maybe we expect our adult relationships to be hard, our friendships, but somehow we think this is going to be smooth sailing.
Yeah.
No.
I can empathize with the American experience in the sense that it is harder, like we mentioned before, because American society is not built to support parents and mothers specifically. Yeah. I think I understand the frustration, but you see all these TikToks of mothers saying, "I'd love to, my baby wants to sleep on me," and you go, "Oh wow, yeah, there is some sort of ingrained evolutionary feature where they enjoy having that presence, being with the mom, either being held." And I feel like you can probably see this through, all different primates, right?
Absolutely. And humans have a little too much time to think about things, and we mostly just think about ourselves. And so also in Western culture, children are thought of as burdens.
Mm-hmm.
And in non-Western cultures, they're considered assets, because they are assets economically. Mm-hmm. These are the little helpers on the garden plot. They're taking care of other children. They're hauling water and firewood. It's not child labor. It's just they're appropriate tasks for these kids, but they contribute to the household, where we've switched after the Industrial Revolution to where the only thing that children are supposed to do is learn. So they grow up and they learn, and then they get a job. And so they become not assets, but burdens, dare I say college. And that's, so we've missed out on something, I think, in that sense. Mm-hmm. And trying to bring back some sort of fun and observation of, whoa, it's quite an amazing thing to watch a little tiny person become an adult.
Oh,
it is unbelievable. And you can't predict anything. Mm-hmm. And the only way to do it, as a friend once said to me, the only reason to be a parent is for the experience. And that's it. There is no other reason. Mm-hmm. Just you want that experience. And a lot of people don't want that experience. And that's perfectly fine.
I want to ask you about breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
This is, again, another fascinating thing. I grew up in an environment with my family, again, we're maybe a little bit more holistic, a little more hippy-dippy. I
was going to say, were your parents hippies? Yeah.
They weren't. They were these like Catholic Canadian people. But for whatever reason, they sort of just, I think, gravitated to sort of like more naturalistic approaches to things. My mom had a couple home births. Things like that. And so my family was just, again, that made more sense to our family. And so, me and all my siblings were breastfed, but I was talking to my mom and my grandmother, and there was this discussion where there was a concerted effort to stop breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And, throughout America, in certain parts, after World War II, there was very little breastfeeding. In certain parts of, Africa and Asia today, there are companies and corporations that have concerted interests into stopping breastfeeding, that they're effectively trying to tell mothers to no longer breastfeed your kids and actually just to buy formula in order to breastfeed your kids. And again, this is another sensitive topic because I think the breastfeeding relationship between the mother and the child is so, specific and unique and special in its own way.
And physiologically important.
Yeah. So I don't want to diminish whatever anyone's individual choice is with this sort of path. And again, there's women that can't breastfeed. There's adopted parents that can't breastfeed. So I think however the baby gets fed and nourished is obviously, I think, paramount and probably the most important thing. But looking at, again, the anthropological record and how it's done in other cultures, what is sort of the research you've done on breastfeeding around the world? What have you found that comes up a lot through other cultures? How is it done? Is it done on a specific schedule? What are sort of the protocols you see?
No, certainly not on a schedule. I mean, especially if you were looking at hunters and gatherers or what anthropologists call small plot agriculturalists, they're growing crops and either eating them or taking them to market. And places where, let's say, Nestle hasn't gotten to them, that's just normal life. It's just totally normal. And sometimes there is cooperative breastfeeding. You might hand it off to your sister if she happens to be lactating as well. And it's just not a big deal. It's just, that's what you do. There are cultures where very quickly they're feeding the baby something else, some kind of gruel or, something like that. So people do that as well. The problem used to be the problem with the corporatization of baby formula is that it was lacking in omega-3 fatty acids, and that was the real problem. But that has changed. But I have the card of my recipe from the hospital of what my mother was supposed to feed me. Because she wasn't going to breastfeed.
Was it like corn syrup and...
It's exactly what it was. Karo syrup and milk.
Hilarious.
And so when you think about it, maybe that's why I really like candy. But there it is. This was not a formula produced by some company. It was just milk with sugar. How bizarre is that?
Right. And this also was not a long time ago. I mean...
No, well. And the other thing is, if you look at the nutritional basis, we use cow's milk, and that's just an accident of the domesticated animals that we have. But in fact, goat's milk would be better. It's more like human milk. The problem with breastfeeding as humans compared to other animals is that human breast milk is watery. And so compared to, let's say, a seal, where a mother can feed her baby and go off into the ocean and look for fish because the baby is very sated because there's a lot of fat in that. But human breast milk is very watery, and that means it's designed to be fed almost continuously. For the baby, so babies cry. If you do it on a schedule and say, okay, I'm going to breastfeed for 15 minutes, that's it, the baby might not get full. I'm using satiated, really. And that has to do with the fat content. And so babies are designed to breastfeed whenever they want, and much more often than every 4 hours or something like that. And even La Leche League, where people are breastfeeding like every hour and a half, that's still less than, let's say, a Bushman, a Kungsan Bushman or Kungsan.
We would call that on-demand.
On demand, that's right. That's what it's called, which is derogatory, right? And it's really... the word that, people I know have tried to get it changed to is on cue rather than on demand, because demand sounds, again, like the baby is taking something away from you. And we really have this same relationship as with sleeping with breast milk culturally, that it has been, morphed by culture into something that it was never intended to be. And the fact that when a woman breastfeeds in America, she has to go hide somewhere because Western culture has sexualized the breast, and that's not necessarily true in other cultures. They are for babies. That's what breasts are for.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that Yeah, it's once my wife started breastfeeding, it's like it no longer is this thing that, again, the society has put onto it, like
Right. Might come back.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
maybe. But it is interesting how, culturally it is so sexualized. And in other places, again, you would see sort of pictures or videos of maybe indigenous people living in a specific,
Yeah.
tribal community, and the woman would be topless. And as,
Right.
sort of pearl clutching Westerners, I would see this and I would
That's
say,
right.
this is so strange.
Right. And
But
you
then,
wouldn't want your little boy to see
no, of
that.
course.
Yeah.
But then you think it's like, oh, well, they have so many children. Perhaps they have, 2 or 3 children, and they might be breastfeeding another sibling's child.
Well, probably not. They might. But there's the other thing is that breastfeeding is a natural birth control.
Right.
So when women are breastfeeding, and if they're doing it with a big space in between, it won't work. It has to be more on cue, on demand. It has to be more continuous. And what it just stops is the production of the hormones that cause ovulation. So that's why when you see someone who has 2 babies in 12 months, within 12 months, one right after the other, most likely they are not breastfeeding.
Right.
And so usually if they're breastfeeding, a woman, if they're breastfeeding for 3, 4, 5 years, and they're in a culture that has no real birth control, that's the thing that will space out children.
Yeah, this is an interesting point. I think for myself at least, I would look at what I imagined a hunter-gatherer society to be, in that, families were massive and they had 10, 12 kids.
Not necessarily.
It doesn't seem to be the case. That
No,
it seems like
because
women would go into puberty a little later. They would.
It's the breastfeeding, and it's also babies dying.
Right.
It's also that, because there's no medical care, no antibiotics. And of course, there are a million ways to be a hunter and gatherer, from marine resources to forests to savannas, whatever. And these days, since a lot of groups have been settled on reservations, but I was just writing about the Aceh people yesterday, and even though they've been settled by the government in Paraguay onto reservations since the 60s, they still go into the forest and gather honey and plants and go after game.
And how many kids might they have?
I don't know exactly. I mean, the answer's there, but I don't know what it is exactly. But the women are still breastfeeding. I think one of the big tragedies that a Western culture imposes on other cultures is formula, because people can't afford to buy it, and it has to be clean and safe and all those things. And it's really just capitalism at its worst, as far as it's my opinion anyway.
Breast milk is a fascinating substance on a sort of microbial level. That it offers a ton of nourishment to the newborn, and seems like it's sort of like codified specifically for them. That there is actual bacteria and nutrients found in the breast milk that is just kind of custom tailored for that specific newborn.
That's right.
Can you speak to that?
It's so important for the baby's immune system, even to adulthood. And there's the hypothesis, the reason the growth in asthma in Western culture has something to do with fewer people breastfeeding, because, and also toddlers not crawling around on the floor where they would be eating stuff that would, then their body is making an immune system. So sometimes our healthy protection of them is not necessarily the best thing you can do. But the best thing a mother can do is breastfeed for a while to get that immune system going. I mean, I wasn't breastfeeding, I'm still here, but I'm an asthmatic as well and have lots of allergies. And I would never say that to my mother, I wouldn't anyway, because she's not here anymore. But and I'm sure there are data on that, and I just don't know it. But that's certainly, I mean, doctors encourage women. There are hospitals that are certified breastfeeding hospitals that will help, and there are lots of lactation specialists who are great. When you think you can't do it, a woman who cannot breastfeed, that's very rare. But it's usually just positional. And because we don't have our mothers and grandmothers who did this, we don't have anybody to tell us how to do it. And so at least friends of mine have hired a lactation specialist to come in, 2 or 3 times to make sure everything's okay. And sometimes nurses in the hospital will do it too. Make sure you're okay before you go home.
Absolutely.
And adapt to that. And a lot of women, when they're working, it's pretty much impossible to keep that up. So either you have to use a breast pump, and that's a mess, or you have to get some kind of way you can go home, or you compromise and do both.
Yeah, I had read. I need to find exactly where. Maybe they can pull up the study that newborns are kissed by their mothers, and that the actual ingestion of sort of the amniotic film that is present on the newborn's body can actually inform the breast milk as to what type of sort of nutrients to deliver based off of what's there. And then I think there's another feedback loop that happens throughout the breastfeeding process that the baby's sort of bacterial biome within their mouth can inform in some way through the areola the type of milk production that occurs on a again, sort of a microbial scale. I had read this and I was like, this is just
And also, if you breastfeed with long periods in between, breastfeeding happens because of the motion of the baby's sucking on the breast. And that's where, and then milk production happens. So if you have long spaces of time in between, that's going to dry up.
The milk supply.
It's a sign that babies were really meant to be breastfeeding all the time, all day long, whenever they're hungry.
Something that I'd read in your book that absolutely blew my mind is that there's different types of breast milk. Again, this is a concept in my mind where I was like, the milk that comes out of a breast is breast milk, and it's the same no matter what time of day you do it, or what session in the feeding it is, what minute in the feeding it is. So can you speak to the ways that foremilk and hindmilk are different?
Well, first of all, there's colostrum, which comes out soon after the baby's born, and in some cultures, they don't allow the mother to eat that or to feed the baby that colostrum. They think it's bad.
Why is
that? Just cultural. Who knows? But it's actually really good. So because breast milk is made physiologically, basically from blood, it's a process that happens within the breast. And the first milk to come down could be very watery, and then the production goes and it gets more fat is contained in it. So again, if you're breastfeeding, you put a timer on and you're only going to do it for 5 minutes, the baby's not going to get that hind milk that's full of fat. And you're going to think, I don't have enough milk for this baby. But it's not that. It's really a mechanical relationship between the baby's mouth and that breast. And as the baby sucks, then the milk is being produced. And so you should just let it go. just let it go till the baby stops.
Right.
But many women, even when my daughter, was young, they'd say, I can't breastfeed. And I'd say, well, I remember one friend, I said, well, here's the name of a lactation specialist. That woman came, and my friend said, that didn't help. And I said, what do you mean? She said, oh, yeah, it worked, but I'm still not going to do this. And really, she just didn't want to breastfeed. She just didn't, for whatever reasons.
Fair enough.
And I'm just like, yeah, okay. You don't want to, so don't do it. Your kid will be fine. But physiologically, immunologically, the baby is better off if it's breastfed.
Yeah.
That's just not me saying. That's pediatricians saying that.
Right. Is that discussed through pediatricians when it comes to like pumping? Like if a woman is pumping to label sort of foremilk and hindmilk and have an awareness that the different types of milk that you actually produce in a specific feeding session will have different levels of fat to sugar ratio.
I don't know. My only experience was taking my daughter to some baby check, and I was all ready to feed her, and the nurse practitioner said very snottily, well, we like to have them weaned by 1 year of age. And I thought to this woman, you have no idea who you're talking to. And then I said, very, very nastily, I said, I bet you do. And went home and just was, furious. And my husband said, you are never taking her to the pediatrician again. And the next time he took her, and the doctor asked all the right questions. He came in the room and he said, "Do you understand her?" By this time she was, like a year and a half, and she was talking. "Do you understand her?" And my ex said, "Yes." And he said, "Does she understand you?" And he said, "Yes." And he just went, check. Pediatricians are looking for pathology. They're looking for the outliers. And they're not there really to give you advice on how to bring up your baby. They're looking for sickness. And all the pediatricians I've talked to said our biggest business is behavioral and mostly sleep. And we have absolutely no training in that.
Interesting.
And, if you have a sick baby, that's why they look at the growth charts. They're not trying to tell you your kid is going to be tall or short. They're looking to see if something's wrong.
Right.
And that's what they're always looking for. But they have been pushed by the culture into giving advice. And one pediatrician said to me, "I just tell them what my parents did." And I went to the trouble to look up medical schools and the training of pediatricians, and they get a course in behavioral genetics, which is if something is off genetically, how that might affect the baby. So we've really put them in this position, and they don't like it, most of them. One pediatrician said to a friend of mine, her daughter was like 2 years old, and he said, "You should have another baby right now." And she went, "Why?" And he was flustered and said, well, you just don't want to give your uterus that much time off or something. And she said, "What's the evidence?" And he went, "Well, I don't know. I don't know." He made it up. Why do people have babies 2 years apart now in America? There's no good reason. None. It's just something that has happened.
Right. Yeah, it is funny going to a pediatrician. You're seeking some type of wisdom, but again, that isn't the purpose of the pediatrician. Like when you explain it, like it'd be like going to like an orthopedic surgeon, being like, "Oh, I hurt my knee. What sport could I play?"
Exactly.
And he'd be like, "I don't know, play baseball, play soccer, like whatever you want. I'm here to fix your knee."
Right. It's like going to the optometrist and saying, "What should I read?" Right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's true.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. So it makes sense that there's so many people that are unsure what to do. But the notion of foremilk and hindmilk, and then even melatonin as a natural byproduct for sleeping is present in PM milk that's produced in the nighttime to help your baby sleep.
I didn't know that. Wow, that's great.
Can we get a fact check? Because here I am explaining things to a professor, and I'm afraid that these are all wrong.
I don't have a baby anymore, but I hope to have grandchildren, and so I need to know.
Yeah, I'm almost certain that's the case. I hope this is the case. That there's like actual sleep agents that'll be found in
Makes
nighttime
sense,
milk.
doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that sometimes women will pump, and then they'll give their. Okay, here we go. Breast milk produces more
around midnight.
And it's one of these things
Isn't that interesting?
You look at sort of the, evolution's undefeated, and you're like, oh, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, that's
great.
great.
But if you're pumping and you're not aware necessarily of when you're pumping, then you might give your baby PM melatonin-laden milk in the morning, and then they'll sleep all day, and then they're up all night. Or vice versa, you give them a sort of an activating daytime milk that doesn't satiate them. And then it's like you're out of lockstep with the way that we've done things for 300,000 years.
My philosophy is that we have such big brains, and it's really a mistake because we spend all our time trying not to think about things, overthinking things, making stupid decisions, and really it's a curse.
Yeah, absolutely. I always look at human nature, and I'm like, we've done a good job with the human part. You know what I mean? Like the human part is thriving. We're thinking, we're consuming things, we're conscious, we're examining ourselves, and we sort of neglected the nature part. Yeah, and it's like we kind of need to bring both into the fold a little bit.
True.
Until we can go full singularity and just join ourselves with the supercomputers and become on the web of things. Right. Until that point, I think we have to be aware of our natural history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how other people in the world do things.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, culturally around the world, when do people typically wean their children? 4 or 5, whenever. Mothers are not going to be happy about that.
No.
They just heard you say that.
American mothers. I'm not saying they should do that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. And they do that because they don't have many, they don't have alternatives, really. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if those women are conscious that it's a natural birth control, but surely they can put two and two together and see that if they keep breastfeeding, some cultures have a taboo against sex when breastfeeding is going on.
Oh, really?
That's another way that they're controlling the birth rate.
Oh, that's interesting. I've also heard that there's a physiological benefit to the health and composition of mothers as they breastfeed.
Well, they certainly will lose weight because
Right.
it's twice the number of calories. And so women who breastfeed tend to lose their pregnancy fat very quickly.
Yeah,
Not always, but they
I had seen a doctor on Instagram that said breastfeeding is the greatest liposuction in history. And it's one of these things you're like, oh, wow. Again,
or you can eat like a pig. You can like double your calories,
Right.
you know.
And it's one of these things, again, I just think about the way human beings have been. And, if you're living in an indigenous sort of tribal community, you're going to breastfeed and then you're going to walk around frequently carrying your baby.
Yeah.
And you are going to burn calories so quickly.
That's right.
Whereas maybe if you're living in a suburb in the United States and you're not breastfeeding, you're going to put your baby in a car seat, you're going to drive, not walk as much, not burn as many calories. And your ability to, lose that weight or to sort of gain the semblance of yourself prior to having the child might take longer.
Right.
And it's, again, one of these things where you're like, oh, it just makes so much sense the way it was.
Now that you're saying that, it just occurs to me, since we've seen such a major change in the composition of American food with processed foods and the increase in obesity that just tracks it perfectly, I wonder how that affects breast milk.
I'm sure
It
the
must.
preservatives and the gums and the
must.
stabilizers. Yeah, I mean, there's no question in my mind that it's terrible. There's actually a book I'm reading right now, Ultra Processed Humans. Excellent book. I forget who it's by, something Robert something. I can't remember. We can look it up. But it's an excellent book that is actually, so far, I'm not through it all the way, it's making the case that the sort of nutritional components that make up food is different, whether it's a homemade item versus a store-bought processed item. So you can look at a homemade cookie and a store-bought processed cookie, and even if they have the same exact nutritional components, they actually affect your body in a different way because of the stabilizers and preservatives that are inserted into the processed food. And again, it's one of these things where I was like, if it's the same amount of sugar, fat, fat, it's the same. It's not.
Thank you for encouraging me to make another batch of chocolate chip cookies.
See, you make them at home. It's great.
I do.
And you look at the ingredients of the things you use in your home. You're not using, dextrose and
no, that's right. Just read the labels.
Yeah, exactly.
It's frightening, and I've seen this change in my lifetime. And it's quite shocking to see that everything is processed.
Oh, absolutely.
Everything,
unless
you're picking it up, out of a bin. And it's green, it's remarkable.
Things you wouldn't anticipate. Like you might get some type of organic, natural-looking granola, and you'll be eating this granola, and you're like, oh, this tastes so good. And you look at the label, and you'll see these stabilizers and these other types of agents in it that are keeping it able to be transported and stay on shelves that are ultimately affecting your body's ability to lose weight, your metabolism.
And I had a farmer friend who had an organic farm. This is off the topic of babies, but and he used to give tours of the farm, and he said, oh, we use fertilizer. We can call ourselves an organic farm because we use fertilizer that breaks down quickly. And it was like, what?
That's it's a manipulation of the label.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. The way that the book puts it, which again, I would encourage people to read, is that they say 5 or more ingredients.
I read that too,
5 or more ingredients, be skeptical that what you're eating is not processed. Again, you can eat processed food. I'm still going to have ice cream from time to time. Absolutely. But an awareness of how much processed food, because I'm pretty sure 1 in 5 Americans, again, according to the book, is having 80% of their diet coming from ultra-processed foods. And there's a ton of issues, socioeconomic, food deserts, all these things that are contributing to this. And also consumers kind of want it.
Oh, absolutely. It tastes good.
When you buy ice cream, you don't want it to have ice crystals and all these problems. You want it to be creamy, and you want it to be filled with palm oil.
Yeah, we did this to ourselves.
It's cheaper, and it travels better, and it's it tastes better.
All those things.
Actually, it doesn't taste better, but it is cheaper, and it does travel better.
Yeah, and if you do takeout or eat out, you don't know what the ingredients are.
Right. Yeah.
I have an idea.
Yeah. So again, that homemade food and you know, like my wife is doing a lot of like oats and things like that for like milk supply, which are excellent for like nuts, oats, things like that. And those are the things that we've been doing.
Maybe this is too personal, but did she need to have somebody help her?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we had a lactation consultant and that was
just like I
hugely
said.
beneficial.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, you know, again, it's not my experience necessarily, so you know, my advice probably doesn't go far here.
We've
But
grown up where we don't.
I've seen the benefits.
Yeah, we don't see people doing it. Most of us weren't breastfed ourselves, and it's weird. When I was writing that chapter of the book, I got on an airplane, and a woman had maybe a 5-year-old, and then another maybe a 2-year-old or 1.5-year-old, and she was breastfeeding, and she looked at me, and I said, I don't care. But it occurred to me that it was the first time I had seen someone breastfeed in like 10 years in public.
Yeah. And it seems like things are kind of moving back that direction. It seems like more people are breastfeeding, which I think is probably a positive trend.
Yeah.
Just for development. And I'm curious to know. Yeah, I'm curious if that plays some type of, you know, cultural shift on the aggregate. You know, breastfeeding versus not breastfeeding.
We're such a strange culture, you know. It's not particularly family friendly. It's not baby friendly, and it makes it really hard. And it makes people not want to be parents because it's, you know, the culture makes it really difficult. Well, most of my friends live in foreign countries, and when I talk to my Australian friends, my friend recently said her brother just had his second baby, and she said, and so he's doing some word I never heard before, and I go like, what's that? And she goes, oh, well, he's a lawyer. He gets 6 months off from work because they had a baby, and he can divide it up any way he wants. Like he can take 2 weeks here, 3 weeks there, a month there. I was like, whoa, you know?
Yeah.
And when my daughter was born, I got nothing.
Wow.
I could have taken the New York State 8 weeks of unpaid leave if I wanted to, and that was it.
Yeah, it's brutal. And again, it's bad for you, but it's worse for your children. Like those are really the people that carry the brunt of it. Yeah. And again, on the aggregate, what that does to a culture that doesn't care about the mother-child bond or even just like the family triad, I just think, you know, I think is a
and
mistake.
Yet American culture always talks about, oh, we care about family, and I beg to differ. I don't think it does.
I did see a study that apparently millennial dads are spending significantly more time with their children.
That's good.
Which, it seems like a big positive. I don't remember exactly how much, but it was like 60% more time with their kids.
Wow,
and you look at it and you're
great.
like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
And again, I'm curious to see what the cultural shift of that is going forward.
I mean, 40% of babies in America are born to single mothers now, but in some of those cases, the mother has a partner. They just aren't married.
Oh, that's one of the statistical things.
My family book, yes.
That's interesting. That's a statistical point. They're like, all right, are they with someone?
Are they alone or are they with someone and they're just not? Because the rate of marriage is, of course, down, although America has the highest marriage rate and the highest divorce rate in Western culture.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Stay tuned for that book.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you credit the declining birth rate in the United States?
Well, I find that really interesting because when I was younger, most of my friends, my female friends, did not have children out of choice. And I was odd because I really wanted to have like 3 kids. And so did my sisters. And I think that we were the generation after the sexual revolution and the feminist revolution, and because there was decent birth control, finally, women could say, "I don't want to." And when I've asked my friends, they've just said, "I didn't want to," or they say, one friend said, "I just thought it would cause a conflict between me and my husband over everything," and another one said, "I didn't like the family I grew up at. I didn't want to have that," and I guess she didn't think she could make it different. You know, so that the reasons are very broad. But what I see now, and even during the last year, there have been so many articles, you know, in the newspaper, online, books written about women in America choosing not to have children. The numbers have skyrocketed. And let me just say, The Onion, you know The Onion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I subscribe to The Onion, and their recent issue had an article said, U.S. birth rate is holding steady at 0. It was great. I laughed out loud. But the birth rate is way down, and not just in America, but everywhere. Italy, Spain. And
Korea and Japan.
Yes, now that's happening too.
Problem.
And I think that when you give women decent birth control, they go, okay, because not everybody wants to have kids. Mm-hmm. And there was no choice before. If you wanted to have sex, you either didn't have sex, so you didn't have children, or, more American women go to college than men. Are in the now more than half the workforce. More women go to graduate school than men. And so, we're going to be in charge. So really, you all should back down. But I think it's interesting. And the reasons women don't want to have children vary greatly. Some people just say, I want to travel, or I don't want this in the way of my career, or whatever. Well, then I don't think they should have children, because you don't want that. You don't want unhappy people being parents. And there was a lot of that.
Yeah. What do you think of the economic strain? I've seen this argument brought up.
I've seen that too, sure.
The wealth inequality obviously is increased. The idea of a Gen Z person buying a home is, far, far lower than their, parents or their grandparents. So I'm curious, do you think that the economic component plays a role?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if you're in a subculture of America that has more of a history of large families, whatever that might be, and you know that you're actually going to have a lot of family members around who are going to help you, because grandparents are often very involved. I don't remember the statistics, but very involved. And if you're someone who doesn't have that kind of familiar network, being a parent would be overwhelming, I think. And people don't seem to see the benefit in having children. Women don't. Like, it's just all burden and no asset, no fun. And so it's very cultural. And culture is very powerful. Mm-hmm. And, I don't really have an opinion about that. I think it's just like whatever happens. It's just interesting to me to see it happen. Mm-hmm. I know some of my friends would have been great mothers, but they choose not to do it. And I've never heard a person say to me they regretted it. I haven't heard that.
To having children? To
not having them.
Oh, interesting.
No one has said that to me. I had a friend say that they were making up their will, and their problem is they don't have any kids, so they don't know who to give their assets to.
That's interesting.
And I said, give it to a charity.
Yeah.
Do that. Because they would give it to their brothers and sisters, but they're the same age, so that seems kind of stupid. So that's kind of interesting, And it would be nice to do an ethnography of women who, by that I mean, really hang out with women who have decided they don't want to have children, and hear what they have to say.
Yeah, it's a interesting dilemma that I've, even just speaking with, friends of mine.
Sure.
Saying, I feel on the one hand a very strong compulsion to, become a mother and have children and, have many children, and that likely would pull me away from the workforce. But then simultaneously having this strong desire to be a career professional and, succeed in the workplace and sort of actualize whatever their academic degree was in. They maybe got a master's degree in school, and they said, well, if I don't work, then I sort of wasted this collegiate time and the money. And I can, empathize with that.
That's because, especially in American culture, we have separated children off from everything else. Children are only supposed to be seen in places that are designed for them, playgrounds, preschools, whatever. They're not incorporated in the culture very well. You go to a foreign country and the kids are there. People complain, I was in Spain and, the kids are at the dinner table at midnight. Like, how horrible is that?
That's great.
You don't do that. You go into a restaurant in America, there are no children. especially if it's like fine dining. And maybe that's why I like being in other cultures a lot, because I really like kids. And I think some people forget that they were kids. They forget they were babies too.
Yeah.
It's a cultural development, and culture is strong and it changes by who knows what means.
Yeah. I'm very grateful my parents included me in a lot of things. I'm grateful for that. And I took many naps on very many nice restaurant booths.
Right.
And I slept at the restaurant.
We took our daughter everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. And once I was invited to a cousin's wedding, and they said she's not invited. And we just went, okay, we're not going. That was our decision. And they made their decision. They're perfectly, they didn't. But those were people who went on to have their own children. So I don't know what that was about. But I just wish children were more socially integrated. Where I live in Brooklyn Heights, I love it now that I live in a place where I see the kids going off to school in the morning and coming back at night, and they just fill the streets.
Yeah.
And it's awesome, especially at Halloween when they're all dressed up and stuff. And where I lived in Philadelphia recently, there were no kids. In downtown Philly, and I thought it was weird.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember reading just children and their desire to be included, and I remember that as a kid, to be included was it was so special. And I think parents sometimes feel burdened with the idea of we have to entertain our child constantly. We have to play with them constantly. When sometimes a solution could be including them to say hey, I'm going to make dinner. And you're going to be included in that process. And that's going to slow down the process.
It'll slow it down. It'll make it messier.
Yeah.
But so what?
But it will be really valuable to the family unit. And then also, it might in some ways be quicker because I don't need to placate you. I don't need to set you up with some type of toy or put you in front of the TV, which who knows what that, from a biological standpoint, the screen exposure can do to our kids. And we
come back to that issue of the decrease in the birth rate because this family that was from Binghamton, the Burns family, they had 8, 10 kids, whatever. And I was talking to their mother once, and I said, boy, you must have just never had any time. And she said, what are you talking about? She goes, the first one, your life changes, you have no time. The second one, it's worse. She goes from the third one on, it's nothing because they take care of each other. And my older sister pretty much, in a lot of ways, brought me and my other sister up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my parents had 7 kids.
Well, there you go. And if you only have 2, it's harder. And if you only have 1, which I think the birth rate is going so that the norm is going to be not 2 kids, but 1. I see it happening soon, Yeah,
you got to be outnumbered.
Yeah.
As soon as you're outnumbered, you just let go. You accept, and you say, you know what? We're going to make it through. And you're not so overly focused with every little decision, driving yourself crazy. Yeah.
And Jim McKenna, the sleep guy, he said he was from a family from, 7 kids with me. He goes, I slept in the same bed with my brothers forever. He said, we'd fight with, your stinky feet, whatever. And he said, we're still close, But he said, it's not a surprise I'm interested in this topic because really I had to sleep with people,
I'm curious what the pro-social dynamics of primates are. Actually, before we get to that question, I want to just jump to a quick break and hear from our sponsors that make this show possible. Thank you for everyone that is watching. I hope you guys are enjoying this conversation live here with Dr. Meredith Small here. What day is it? Today's the 11th. Not a lot of people think these are live. I've gotten comments about that. Oh, are these really live? We're really live, December 11th. And we're here talking about the anthropology of early childhood. We're going to go to a quick break. If you have any questions for Meredith, please drop them in the comments. We'll be back in just a moment. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break really quick because it's 2024, and it's time to talk about something important. When you are seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. Yes, that's right. The world is a crazy place, and one person's negligence can result in another's settlement. And that's why I got to talk to you about Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They have over 100 offices nationwide and over 1,000 lawyers. Yes, these are the big boys. You know them, you see their billboards all over the world. If you ever drove down I-90 from Florida to New York, I'm telling you, you've seen the billboards, all right? Have you ever watched a UFC fight? You've seen them right on the banner. I'm telling you, these are the biggest guys in the game, all right? With over $20 billion recovered for over 500,000 clients, Morgan & Morgan has a proven track record of fighting to get you full and fair compensation. The annoying thing with most attorneys is that in order to submit a claim, you got to call them up, you got to talk to their people, you got to go back and forth on emails, you got to hope that they see it. They might charge you just to even look at their claim. Here's the cool thing with Morgan & Morgan. With 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim and one of their licensed attorneys will take a look at it and get back to you. It's that easy. It's like ordering something off Amazon. It's just a couple clicks. You can submit your claim very easily and cheap. Yeah, how about $0? That's how much it costs to submit a claim with Morgan & Morgan. Extremely easy, no fee required. So, if you are ever injured, you can go check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. That's right, unless they win for you. Unless they fight and get you compensation, you're not paying a single dollar. That's a pretty good deal. So, for more information, go to forthepeople.com/Gagnon. That's correct, forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or dial pound law, that's pound 529 from your cell phone. That's for the people, forthepeople.com/Gagnon, or dial pound law, pound 529 from your cell phone. This is a paid advertisement. Now let's get back to the show after this short disclaimer. And we're back. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the tent. We're here at camp. We got a couple great questions from the audience. All right, Meredith, what about this one? Should children be allowed on airplanes? What do we say?
Yes.
All right.
Why not?
I mean, I can tell you a couple of reasons why.
Well, I
mean, you've been next to a crying baby.
Of course, I've been next to a crying baby.
You've had a crying baby, probably.
I do remember a flight once from New York to San Francisco. My daughter was, I don't know, 3 or something like that. And she spent the entire time, back when that short period where they had phones on the back of the seats, and she just pulled it off, put it in, pulled it off, put it in. And I thought, oh my God, she must be driving the people in front of me crazy. And I think I asked them, and I don't think they even heard it.
Oh, that's nice.
She did that for hours. And we flew to Europe. I mean, we flew around the world with her and flew to Australia with her. And I looked up stuff, and I would make a bag full of I'd wrap up little toys and stuff. And as a result, as an adult, she loves airports.
Oh.
I think it's very odd, but she does. And
that's strange behavior. I don't know about that.
Daughter of an anthropologist, she flies all over the place.
Yeah. But they transport big dogs. Sometimes they put them in the cargo hole, right?
Oh yeah, they do that. Yeah, sure. And
you
cats can be in.
You can't do that with kids, I guess.
No, I'm very sympathetic. I just saw some really funny humor skit where, excuse me, from a TV show where, there's the people with the crying baby and the other people who got on, and they have presents for everybody all around them, and it's pretty good.
Oh, I saw one of those. I thought it was very sweet.
Yeah, and it does separate the baby to children haters from it's okay, because most of the people on that plane who've had children, been there, done that, and they're fine.
Yeah.
But for other people, and I just feel sorry for kids when they're crying.
I empathize so much. I see the mom struggling with the crying baby, and I'm like, oh, she must
be
the
baby, because
stressed
you
out.
go up and down, and the baby's ears are having trouble. And
it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you have any thoughts about microplastics and the effect on fertility and breastfeeding?
I think that's a really interesting question. I don't know anything about it, except, that our recognition of microplastics in the last, 2 years or something like that, is frightening.
I remember buying soap in high school with microplastics in the soap. Did you ever see this?
As like a scrubby or something?
They were literally selling it like soap with like microbial beads.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And I remember
about that.
It's literally just pieces of plastic.
It's just scary and disgusting.
And that was sold. Like they were selling, like this is lead paint.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It's hard to imagine that it is not affecting breast milk and
I think they've done research where they found microplastics in breast milk.
Geez.
And they found it at the bottom of Mariana's Trench, and they found it in the stomachs of the fish we eat, and it's just all over.
It's horrible.
You're eating a credit card of plastic every couple months or something like that.
Oh dear God!
Yeah, I've read exactly the statistic. One of the congressmen said it at a hearing recently, and it's a little stressful.
We really are the worst species on Earth.
But we're also the best. It goes both ways. The good with the bad, right, Meredith?
We're destroying our own nest.
Yeah, but we built an awesome nest.
We did build an awesome nest.
Humans do awesome things. We also do crazy, awful, the worst shit.
Yeah.
But we're pretty cool when we're not doing that stuff.
This is true. This is true.
Okay, that's a great question from Jonathan. I appreciate you asking. I'm curious. Do you know anything about ancient Egypt? I know you're well versed on Venetian history, but someone asked about Egyptian children.
I really don't. As I said, I'm writing this book about family, and the only thing I just read recently was about an origin myth about two gods who then mated, and they had twins, and then those twins had twins. But that's a mythological thing. But no, I really don't know anything. But I think it's an interesting question.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. And then last question before we move on. To talking about primates. Resources for parents in the next 3 to 5 years. I have one, Our Babies Ourselves by Meredith Small, an excellent book that I recommend everyone read. But are there other resources people should check out?
Well, there's this book that came after that. It's about after kids start walking and talking. And it's called Kids, my title. So that's sort of the companion book to Our Babies Ourselves. And it has a lot of cross-cultural stuff in it. Like I went to Dominica and followed this anthropologist named Mark Flynn. And I mean followed him around. And he's been studying this one village for about now 40 years. And he's actually a cultural anthropologist. And so he's lived with these people forever, and he also has integrated physiological studies, especially levels of cortisol. So as we were walking in this very hilly part of Dominica, he would just stop the kids on the way to work, and they know him, and they're talking to him. And as they're talking to him, an older woman came up. She's actually the matriarch of the village. And they're talking about other things like, how are your mom and dad? What are they doing? Blah, blah, blah. And this elderly woman, dressed just beautifully, is helping Mark as he's handing her a test tube and then swabbing inside of a kid's cheek and then sticking it in. She's holding the test tube. She's putting the test tube on top because he's been doing this forever. And so he has cortisol levels, and I'll give you the bottom line of his study, which is fantastic, which I write about in Kids and also wrote about for Discover Magazine and New Scientist a long time ago. The bottom line is kids are not stressed by poverty, which can be a big stressor, or things at school or soccer practice. They are stressed by family dynamics. For example, when dad hits mom, he hears about it and he runs into that kid, he tests them, their cortisol spikes. And the other important, there it is, and the other kids who are in families that experience a lot of trauma like that, or dad is going off to work on another island to make money, and then he comes back and he's gone and he's back, and they're living with their grandmothers and everything. And kids who have either very high levels of consistent cortisol or very low, they have behavioral issues. And as Mark said to me, and it's better in Dominica than it is in America because these kids are surrounded by their relatives, and they're always and I was there and I watched it. They at one point people were yelling across these hollows, "Where's the American girl?" And the person next to me goes, "She's next to me," and everybody knows everybody's business, and life is lived outdoors, as Mark said. That's why he could do this work, because life is lived outdoors. But kids respond to family trauma, and it changes them physiologically and behaviorally.
Wow.
When that happens. So there are in that book, I write about other researchers who are working on young children, kids.
Now, when you say kids don't get stressed by what happens at school or soccer practice,
no, they're fine.
Is that in relationship to the trauma of some type of family dynamic gone awry?
Can be.
So not to say that kids don't get stressed by school, but
right, but that's not the major thing.
I see.
And it's really whatever is going on in the family, and he only has privy to that because he knows them all so well, and he's lived there, and he's brought his own kids there, and he's very integrated in the community. The photos are pretty great. His tall skinned guy walking down the street, and all these kids running around him, and then they'll just has research that says, and they put a scale down outside the school. The kids come out and they jump on it, just getting their. I mean, it's an amazing piece of anthropology.
Yeah, it's just great. Another element as far as early childhood development, I've read that children playing in mixed age groups is the single best
That's right.
Sort of agent or catalyst for healthy adjustment into adulthood.
Absolutely right. And that's in that book too.
Can you explain what that means?
Well, let's think of it in a way Americans can understand, in the sense that, remember the one-room schoolhouse, okay that, a long time ago. And so the older kids sometimes were helping the younger kids, not just even in socialization, but learning things. And in big families, you have that. You have the older kids interacting with the younger kids. But because of the drop in the birth rate and the fact that we divide our schools by age, the kids don't have the resource of the older kids as examples or mentors or people who actually teach them things. And all the research shows that they learn better, they do better in mixed age group situations. So that would be an easy fix, actually. If
what
we
would
wanted
be the best
to.
solution for that? Just schools? Yeah.
School.
All right, so how would that work, though? You would put kids of different ages in different classes?
Yeah, like kindergarten, first and second grade all together. And
yeah,
you just have several classes of them because you'd have so many
up
kids.
Until second grade, what are you even doing in school?
Playing.
Right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess, how old are you in kindergarten? You're in
4 or 5. Mostly 4.
And a 5-year-old could play with a 7-year-old.
Yeah,
They're not that disparate.
Sure.
Interesting. Yeah, I think about my childhood, again, having 6 siblings. Yeah. I was constantly playing with older kids. I was constantly catching up to try to, keep on pace with what, my siblings were doing. And I certainly feel like that benefited me, even in sports, that I was playing soccer with kids my age, but I had been playing with my sister and my brother that were 3, 4 years, 5 years older than me.
And you learn how to resolve conflicts too. You fight.
Right.
And you resolve those conflicts.
Yeah.
And you put up with people that you don't like. And you're going to have to do that when you're an adult too.
That's such another interesting element about sort of how children learn through play.
Yeah.
Which is really the only way, it seems like, again, I don't have any degree, but it seems like any type of animal, primate, mammal
absolutely.
Learns from a young age is through play. Like if you look at even lion cubs, the way that they play with their, mom or their dad is them hunting. They'll do these sort of simulated hunt type things where they'll creep up on their mom and then the mom will turn around and they're not laughing. They're not emoting. I don't want to anthropomorphize these animals, but they are playing and learning how to hunt through play. And I look at human beings and I say, oh, we certainly learn how to be functional adults through play.
Absolutely.
But one of the interesting things that I found is that oftentimes parents can be sort of too eager to intervene in early childhood play. That for an example, let's say there's a group of 8 kids that are going to play some type of capture the flag game, or they're going to play war or some type of make-believe game. And the kids will argue for an hour before the game. I'm not sure what this is here. The kids will argue for an hour before the game, setting up the rules. And parents sometimes will see this and be sort of annoyed, or
they step in.
And they step in because they're well-meaning. They're eager to sort of perpetuate and sort of get the play going. Yeah. And instead, what they've actually done is they've removed the ability to resolve conflicts and to create rules and boundaries with their peers. Right. And so as a result, these parents come in well-meaning, saying, "Oh, get on with the playing. Here are the rules. You guys do this. You guys do this. Right. Now go on." But the learning doesn't come necessarily from the play outright. It comes from the formation of the play rules. And again, it's another
Absolutely.
thing that in my
Yeah.
mind, I'm like, oh, I would definitely be the parent to intervene because I'm so eager to help the kids when the best thing to do for the kids is to leave them alone.
Give them the box of play clothes and walk away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is another
Yeah.
thing I just think culturally gets lost a little bit.
Right.
It's simultaneously, like being like so eager to help the kids, you're constantly playing with
Yeah.
them and you're doing too much for them, but then you get so exhausted that you get burnt out.
Yeah.
Just leave the kids
I'll
alone.
tell you two stories about my daughter that I find really hilarious. One is we had a gravel yard, and I don't remember how old she was, 6, 7, 8, I don't know. And I hear some noise, and she's out on the driveway, and it was perfectly safe. And she's got a big rock, and she's smacking the other rocks. And I came out, and I said, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm making stone tools." And I went...
That's an anthropologist kid
I
right
swear, I never used the word stone tools in my house ever in my life. And I thought, this is, and they were good too. They were like really sharp and everything. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Like one of these?
Yeah, like one of these. Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't this good, but it was decent. Yeah, I was looking over at those. It's probably what made me think of
Yeah,
it.
my friend Donnie Dust, he's a flint napper.
Oh, those are really nice.
Yeah, he made these.
Yeah,
They're
you
gorgeous.
can take courses in anthropology that will teach you how to do that.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
pretty great. And the other time I came home, and there was a giant box in the dining room. I think we'd gotten a new dishwasher or something. I don't remember. And there was a little flap on it, and the little flap goes like this. And then I see written on the outside of the box, so she could write, "Stress Shop." And she's not talking. She's not saying anything. And then there were instructions. You write down your question, and you put it through the slot, and the stress shop will respond to you. So I wrote down something like, how can I get my students to really like me, or something like that. And I put it in. And then out came a little Ziploc bag of shells and a message. I don't remember what the message said, but there was some message like, here, you can play with these shells and that'll be good. And I thought to myself, oh my God, is this what I've done to this child? She thinks that what she invents is a stress shop? Like, is that how she sees her household?
Oh, that's so funny.
But she did that, and because she was an only child, it was important to me that she had friends, so we would always try to get people to come over, and I'd walk out of the room and just let them do what they want, and they would, play veterinarian with the stuffed animals and
Hilarious.
stuff like that. Yeah, no, it is. There are moments of great hilarity.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm so curious. I don't know if this might be a little bit outside of your purview or your professional expertise, so feel free.
Doesn't mean I can't talk about it.
Now we're talking. So many academics are afraid. I'll speak
Nah,
to professors,
me.
and they go, I don't know.
Well, quantum physics. I have nothing to say. But
Well, I was going to
ahead.
ask you about the double slit experiment, but
Yeah.
we can move past that. I'm curious. Do primates, like monkeys, macaques, do they cry? Do they cry like?
You mean like tears coming out of their eyes?
I guess just whining in the way that
Yes. Absolutely.
Homo
they
sapien
whine.
babies will cry.
Oh yes, they whine.
And how do
Somebody picks them up. It could be anybody. You just pick them up and
then they stop.
they stop. Yeah. But no, when you say that, I have this vision of Barbary macaques. Like one of these little macaques just sitting there going, and eventually somebody comes over and picks them up.
Interesting.
stop.
There's so many little things I feel like we can learn from studying macaques and other primates that haven't lost sort of that instinctual maternal characteristic.
And the question is always, does that tell us anything about human behavior? I mean, many different kinds of people watch primates, non-human primates, psychologists, animal behaviorists, veterinarians, but anthropologists do it to see, is there anything there that you can equate to the evolution of human behavior? And I would say attention to kin. They know who their kin are.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the same sort of thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure you've seen this experiment that was done with capuchin monkeys, I believe. There's been a couple
smart.
that are fascinating. Oh, they're too smart. It scares me. I'm like, they're too much like us. So I'm like, this freaks me out. But they basically put a little baby capuchin and they scare it. They have this little robot scary thing.
Yeah.
And they have two mothers that are available for the capuchin to go get comfort from.
And one of them is the real mother, or they're just two female adults?
Two fake mothers.
Oh, two fake mothers.
Yeah, and it might be possible if you want to pull this up, you can search, I guess, capuchin mother experiment. And one of them is wiry.
Oh, I think these are not capuchins. These are rhesus monkeys.
Oh, that's what it is.
It's Harry
exactly
Harlow's
right.
work.
Yes. Okay. Can you finish the explanation?
Yes. So this is Harlow's work from the University of Madison, Wisconsin. And there's actually a fabulous book by Deborah Blum. Maybe look that up because I can't remember the name, but I used to make my students read it all. So this is Harry Harlow, The Nature of Affection. And so they take the babies away from their real mothers. They give them, one is the wire one, which you see there with the big eyes, and the other one is a cloth one. And the wire one has a bottle in it. And the bottom line is the baby will go to the wire mother to eat and immediately back to the cloth mother. And Harlow's work, no, not Monkey Wars, and not the poison one.
So not Monkey Wars.
Not Sex on the Range. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, Deborah, but Love at Goon Park.
It's
that
Park.
One right there. Fabulous book. And Deborah Blum got a job at University of Wisconsin, and then she got into this, and she said to me once, because I knew her from her Monkey Wars book that got about animal rights, and she got a Pulitzer Prize for that. And I was at a meeting, and she was there, and she turned to me, and she said, we were in the line for the bathroom, and she said, I just realized this whole book is about attachment. I went, right. And it's fabulous. It's written for the popular press, and it explains the development of the that we finally understand about attachment theory. And Harlow's work, it was brutal, because it's hard to watch because he's pulling these baby monkeys away.
Can you look up the video of the Harlow experiment of the two rhesus monkeys? The video is just like...
Aren't they cute? They're so cute.
They're adorable.
Yeah. So there are, just to give listeners some background, there are about 22 species of macaques. They're actually the most ecologically widespread primate after humans. So if you've ever seen the Japanese macaques in the hot tubs in Japan, they're macaques. I've studied 4 different species of macaques. And Harlow, if you read her book, Harlow was a real jerk. But the reason you get to be with your son right away is because of this work, because it was so convincing that baby humans needed physical attachment.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time in America not that long ago where babies were born, immediately separated from the mother, put into a sort of warm kind of incubation place, and put into a room, and you might not see your baby until the next day.
That's right. I'm sure that happened to me. But Harlow's work was instrumental, and it went in for a very long time, and people have done, built on that. But the basic idea is that physical touch is just as important as nutrition. And this speaks to our conversation about baby wearing and sleeping with your baby. It's all part of that. And I don't think anybody can read that work and not be changed by it because it's so striking. So then what they did after they had these crazy young ones, I mean, they were really crazy. They did some really bad experiments, sticking them in a thing called the pit of despair. It was like a funnel, and the little monkey was all by itself, and to see if it would go crazy. But then they tried to fix them by giving them little therapists, and they put in the cage with the crazy monkey an older monkey, still a juvenile, that had been brought up correctly, who was affectionate, and it worked. So that monkey influenced the one that was crazy, and the idea was you can change this, you can fix it.
Oh, wow.
And that's what he showed.
Wow.
So if you have a child who, let's say, was adopted under terrible, conditions, like back in Romania, and that if you work hard enough, that hopefully you can change whatever mental illness that has infused that poor creature from not getting any touch. And
it's
it's not just, but no touch at all.
It breaks my
No,
heart.
I can't even look at it. It's just,
It's so
really hard
sad
for me.
and I'm curious if there's someone that's listening to this program. Maybe they just had a baby and they have the sort of social or economic means to do some of the things that you've outlined in the book. You know, wearing your baby frequently, sleeping with your child, having your baby on their back, breastfeeding frequently from the boob, things like that. And let's say they have one more objection and they say, Meredith, I just don't want to create an overly dependent baby.
Right.
Like kind of the thing we've been alluding to throughout the conversation. I don't want my baby to be too independent. I want them to be independent and sort of well-adjusted and flourishing on their own.
Yeah.
What would be your response to that?
My response is the study that Jim McKenna told me about the kids in kindergarten who they used co-sleeping, but Jim said it's not just one thing. You know, it's really a suite of things. If somebody is co-sleeping, they're more likely to be breastfeeding. They're more likely to carry their baby. He said, so that's not parsed out very well, but those kids were really independent. And I don't know, I just hold up my daughter as the perfect example. Who's completely independent and self-reliant. And I just think that shouldn't be something to worry about. That will happen naturally because the rest of the culture is all about that. And it's just part of growing up as a human pretty, at some point, even if you're living in a multi-generational extended family place, you're still going out and tending to the cows or pulling up the plants, and you're marrying somebody and maybe moving to a different village. And, those things still happen. There is no evidence that I know of that doing that brings up a dependent adult. And what does that mean to be a dependent adult, actually? Does that mean you live with your parents or and what's so bad about that, really? If you were Italian, you'd be living with your parents.
Right.
I have lots of Italian friends, but one explained to me she was in her 20s, and she and her sister still lived with their parents in Milan. And she said, we talked about this. I said, it's very different from America. When I was growing up, my parents said, when I was 18, to each of their 4 children, basically get out and call when you get a job. There was nothing. Mm-hmm. And I described this to her, and she said, well, what Americans don't understand is that we also separate from our parents. We just do it when we're living with them because the economics are such that they nobody can afford to have a separate apartment when they're 20 or whatever. And so, college doesn't really cost anything, but you have to have some place to live. For example, my Italian teacher, when he finished, he has a master's degree, and he went back and lived with his parents in Puglia, but he was running a language business, which has turned into a huge business. He had rented an office, and he said, it's nothing. He has his independent life. He just eats dinner with his parents, and he talks to them. He's completely independent financially. He helps supporting his sister. It's lovely to see, really lovely.
Yeah, we do have such an interesting notion that if you are too close with your parents, that there's some type of paraphilia.
We think it's pathologically dependent. Everybody all these Italians I know, it's not like that at all. When I said to him I hadn't seen one of my sisters for 23 years, he said to me, I don't even understand that. I can't even comprehend it.
It'd be like never looking in the mirror or something. It's like such a strange notion.
He just couldn't absorb it at all.
Yeah.
And, I would say to him, and for good reason, but, really, it's weird.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be exposed to families that are functional and supportive, but not intrusive at the same time. His parents don't tell him what to do, And he's one of the most mature, independent people I know.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that Americans worry about, and maybe they shouldn't so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course one would think about it, but maybe not worry so much.
Can you nurture your babies too much? Can you love them too much? Can you fall prey to manipulation? Can they trick you? Can they coerce you?
Okay, manipulation, that's a good one because people do think that. They think crying is manipulation. And Ron Barr would say crying is a signal. They're trying to tell you something. Now, if someone, is a red light manipulating you? You could say, yeah, it's manipulating me to stop the car.
Right. It's changing your behavior, perhaps. It's cueing what you're doing.
When you're hungry, is your body manipulating you? It's giving you a signal.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe the good idea is kind of move away from the idea of manipulation and just think of these things as a signal.
Mm-hmm. Does that change at a certain point if your kid's like 5 or 6 and is like, if you don't give me candy, I hate you? Then
hate me. Grow a backbone. It's like, I don't know. I don't know any parents like that, but I'm sure they're out there that they feel insulted or manipulated, and certainly teenagers try to manipulate you, but you just have to stand strong.
Yeah. That'll be a fun test. It's hard to even imagine my kid becoming a teenager.
You just can't predict.
Yeah.
I was a really good teenager.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of my sisters, we were great.
What does that mean? What does that mean? Why were you a good teenager?
Oh, we never argued with her parents. We didn't do anything bad. We didn't sneak around. No, we were good.
It's because you had no breast milk. That's what it was. You had no attachment, so you were just like, this is just my roommate. Yes. What am I going to do with my parents? This is just some lady I know. So maybe there are some benefits.
Yeah,
maybe we got to go back.
That's right.
Meredith, this has been awesome. I'm such a fan of you and your writing and your book, and I'm excited to read Kids, and I'm excited to read this family book that's going to come out as well.
So far it's called Together, but I don't know. Now that the Surgeon General last spring, I just realized his book was called Together, so I don't know if I get to call it that, but
Yeah. Oh, did you? The last thing. We're going to wrap up soon, but there's one more thing I read that I thought was so interesting, that apparently helicopter parenting.
Yes. What about snowplow parenting? Or is that just an Ithaca thing?
Wait, what is that?
That's even worse. That's even people who are more extreme than helicopter parents. They're there with the snowplow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That apparently this has been diagnosed by the Surgeon General as being potentially psychologically damaging to children.
I would think so. I had a friend she's not my friend anymore, so I think I can say this. Her son went off to college, and she said, I have to go with him, drop him off, because I have to show him how to make a bed.
Ooh.
I said, he's 18 and he's never made a bed. And then she got embarrassed. And then he called her up from the drugstore and talked to her about which shampoo he could buy. And she also tried to tell him what courses to take. And also, she was looking for an apartment in his third year. When she was looking at courses, I just kept saying to her, stop it. You're not, I'm the professor. I'm like, they're his courses, not yours. Well, he has to have these. I said, back off.
Oh,
and when the apartment thing came, I turned around to my 15-year-old and said, if you wanted to get an apartment, what would you do? And she just went, well, I'd look in the local, paper, and then I would look here, and then I would talk to these people. And I went, oh, thank God, because, I never sat and taught her how to do that, but she picked up on it. But this kid, nothing.
It's a funny dichotomy, right? That you might have a parent that, and again, this is a generalization. I don't know if this is a specific person, but you might have a parent that, puts their baby in a different room, and then when they're 16, 17, they're over them, and
that's right,
and they're the ones that are
exactly
on top
right.
of them.
And it's this push.
Whereas you sleep with your kid and you nurture them from 0 to 8, and then you leave them alone.
You leave them alone, and you watch. You watch, because you got to be, safety is the thing. But and they they do learn, and they learn from their friends, and they learn from other people's parents, and they learn from you. Helicopter parents, I personally find them really annoying. Mostly because I'm a professor and I have to deal with them in college, and that would take a whole nother podcast for me to tell you about interfering parents in college.
Well, that's not the next one we're going to do. The next one we're going to do, we're going to talk about Venice.
Oh,
because you have a fascinating
expertise
about Venice, but we will save that for a different day.
Okay,
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure.
This is fabulous, and I'm excited to do this again.
Yeah, sounds great.
Thank you, everybody that watched at home. I appreciate the questions, and as always, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm really enjoying doing these live. I think they're so fun. I feel like there's more of like an energy. It's fun to see you guys' feedback in real time. So we'll continue to do versions of these. And I'm really enjoying the rate that we're putting out episodes. I think it's so fun. This is our third one this week, so we are We are cooking. We got more merch on the way. We got t-shirts. A bunch of people have been hitting me up. We have awesome shirts, hats, all sorts of stuff that I spent a lot of time working on. And I'm doing all the fulfillment and packaging myself. Everyone that you order will come with a signed letter from me, just expressing my gratitude, because I'm so grateful for every person that listens to the show, that asks questions, that's willing to open their mind and think about the world in a different way. We got some more episodes coming out this week that are awesome. Tony Hernandez will probably drop tomorrow, talking about the mafia, the Cosa Nostra, the Italian mob, the Venetian mob, maybe, in New York City, and his experience growing up around that. And just a bunch more episodes coming out this year and in January that I think you guys are really going to enjoy. So as always, thank you so much for being a part of the show, for making it possible, and see you next time here at camp. Good night. Amazing.
Can the Wizard of Oz back there behind the curtain pull up? I'm going to give you a referral.